It reminds me of the whole.
It has begun.
It reminds me of the whole way of how
And we are back.
meditation is done through the breath. You know, you let the breath overtake everything as a single meaning. This is the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we can get into that. Of course, we should introduce our live stream to our lovely viewers.
Yep. My introduction into this series, into this particular video, is with a complete segue of a tangent that's not going to be really discussed right now.
Correct. But what will be discussed is a continuation of the book Portal Mountain, The Quest for Coherence. And what a quest it is. It has been a difficult journey for us. But
on many different levels, yes.
Yes, and over the past 3 years, we've been developing the Portal Mountain community. The past year and a half, almost, we've been doing this live stream development, filling in all the details, all the little blanks and stuff.
At least having a record of the ideas, yep.
Yeah, something that we can go back and look into. Of course, we've always encouraged participation. If anybody have questions or whatever, we usually get into discussion throughout the week and then bring things up as we go here. So this is, of course, a casual development meeting. We call it casual because we are usually having a beer, a beverage of some sort. Ta-da! Mm-hmm. And
our sacramental burritos are in place.
Yep. We will obnoxiously eat the burrito
and talk with our mouths full
and spilling out.
I expect my beer to be full of second meal by the end of it.
So, turns out, of course, it's difficult to write a book.
Shit.
Although I have, in the last couple weeks, have been very productive.
I had like 4 failed attempts, if not 5, right now.
To write something, get something written.
Right.
Well, I've had a little practice with like writing essays and stuff. You know, maybe 10,000 word, which is quite a lot. This book, upon reviewing and thinking about things, it's probably going to end up being, let's say, 60,000 words. And I think that comes up to like 150 pages or something like that, of sparsed out kind of. I want to put diagrams. I want to kind of arrange words. I don't want it to be a flat text the whole time. I want imagery as much as possible.
I think part of the exercise as well is to ensure that it's not just the way I explain things that's going to be like the forefront of what Portal Mountain is and what the point of it all is, but rather through the conversation that you and I have. Right?
Yep.
It's a matter of, are these ideas actually understandable by another human being when they're spoken, and can they be reformulated in such a way that is a bit more clear than originally articulated and like
in your academic speak, which I usually have to translate so that people understand the practical angle of what did he actually say. What does that even mean?
Yeah, so it's also to make sure that it's not just like one person's musings, right? But relatable.
That's why that's the ideal goal, I guess you could say, of the conversation that we have over these development meetings.
Yeah.
Is so that at least it's filtering through at least 2 people. What I say filters through him, what he says filters through me. We can kind of back and forth and get like an idea, something more well-rounded expression, so if you will.
Yeah, it's also helpful to just if there's a momentum on a specific structure that we're thinking about metaphorically in our heads and manipulating its relevance. So that there's checks and balance in place, to a degree, of course.
Yep. And
anyway, doing my justification horn here. Interesting that's the word I'm seeing.
Justification.
Cool.
Yes. So we wanted to go over the book again. Probably
More briefly, though.
top to bottom as brief as possible. I want to just give. I've been working on the first, like the start sections of the book, just ordering and justification wise. I do want to keep it brief, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail. I think that's probably better to just give a shell. That way people can glance it as fast as possible and get into the content.
Well, these meetings are never about the full flushed out content.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to take away and bring into the picture after the fact.
Yeah.
But what's gonna be coming back to us? That's definitely what we need to flush out. So my idea here, because we're so close to the end of this, is to kind of plow through the beginning, to reiterate and to
Quickly give the structure
and recontextualize even ourselves around around the end of the book, so that we have the correct call it velocity or trajectory to land in the places we want.
So since the last time, I don't know how much we got into this whole machine idea last time, but that kind of really took off in my view. As a
You've been developing
as
it
a
for the
major
past couple
structure of this book, a way to organize this book,
Right.
as a series of machines which can kind of each form its own plateau, and then the next machine can kind of use the facilities of the machine below to
Right.
operate, and so on and so forth, where we have 4 machines we end up with.
And machine in this case is a reference to a primordial archetype, correct?
Yeah, we didn't really flesh that out, but I think it's going to fit.
Well, yeah, like the mechanism of society, if you will, because that's what the original archetype is meant for. So
Yeah.
So once you have once you have a bunch of humans in
A
archetypes,
collection of parts that does something.
the machine would reflect the organization of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a reference to the fact, like, it's a metaphorical machine in the sense that the entire being that is in question, the subject matter itself, is in the context of a world that has certain physical rules and rules that flow from these.
Yep.
So that's where the machinery concept and metaphors.
It's meant to give that imagery that there's a sort of autonomous processes that just seem to go on without any conscious type of
decision making.
involvement. It's just things that go on. So, and this book is geared and dedicated towards members of the guild, as we say. Members are those who already kind of have a good understanding of the meat of what we're talking about, that don't need to be convinced of anything, right? It's already, you've had certain experiences or whatever, or you see the world a certain way, and you already know, like, why, the reason for what we call, or what I call, critical activism. I had a definitely like activist feeling or bent to my experience, like once I kind of stepped out of that, or once it hit me, where this kind of ego structure is sort of collapsed in a way. People call it like ego death or stuff like that. There's so many different ways of describing that, but it changes your perspective. It shifts out of that, like, I'm no longer just my name, but
It's the moment where transactional identity becomes sort of unreal, while at the same time there's no other context into which to plug into. So
yeah, so you're kind of forced into it.
So remaining,
Even seeing it for what it
remaining
is.
plugged into the transactions without seeing any value to them is this dreadful death of the ego.
Yeah, and this is like part of the zeitgeist and all that too. The feeling of something empty, something missing out of the soul, like there's something more to life than this. but meanwhile you get dragged back into the machine because that's how everything gets sustained.
Right. Well, once you lose meaningful transaction, it becomes an arbitrary transaction, and charlatanism is very very ripe for not abusing exploiting this because now there's this sort of vacuum, but no,
right,
and nothing to fill it in with.
And so this is basically how the book starts off in this kind of manner. So if you want, we can just jump right into it where we start off with where that goes. I have been kind of I did kind of write some quick notes as to like what maybe the content even of like the actual content of the book itself.
Yep.
Rather than notes about the content, I've actually started to write sentences that may make it into the book.
Well, okay. They're brief, right?
It's very brief.
Okay, so let's go through that. See how it lines up with our previous dissertations of recap.
Mm-hmm.
And do kind of like a small comparison, and then try to really nail down the last few sections so that they're not
Sure.
as muddy.
It's gonna be tough because when you try to justify one chapter being before another chapter, we could probably do it pretty quickly together.
We don't have to explain everything if you and I are in agreement about it being there, and we kind of already know why.
Right.
Because I need to be back, but the reason being is because we can save time, and also it's found in the other videos. So.
Yep, correct. And with that, we will take a short break.
Funny.
Fine and good. Good and fine. All right. So, this book starts off with the hook. That's what we're after. What we call the zeitgeist.
The hook.
That shit is bad. It sucks. The world is exploding. Something is missing.
It's a qualitative word, not a quantitative one,
Right.
which means there's no quote-unquote extrinsic proof of a thing called the zeitgeist. Like, this is not that. This is not that idea.
Yeah, no, it's so qualitative. We're speaking to relate to like experiences that people are having, that they feel.
In particular,
And-
something is missing from the system in which we find ourselves.
And what is missing exactly, we can't really get into it in the very beginning. All we can point to is the various, like, even we can hook into, like, you know, whatever. People believe that the environment is being destroyed. Well, pretty obvious.
Something is missing.
Yeah, like, yeah. So, the point of this chapter...
That's a great example, by the way, to demonstrate how simple the actual quality of it is. It's not supposed to be meant to be like this big divine zeitgeist, typical of, you know, trying to paint grand pictures,
Like-
even though it is kind of.
Yeah, you just know that companies are, for example, motivated to externalize all costs. So the environment is the one that takes, like, the externalized environment, that which is not inside the company, gets shit on.
Which
Right.
includes the other people.
By default. So we know that the motivations, the way that people are being motivated is to basically destroy everything around us, and that's what it looks like. It looks like that's what's happening. But it also looks like nobody is able to stop it, and only
And
you
it all
know,
feels very, very wrong.
a certain percentage of people can really feel this zeitgeist, but they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, to the extent that they can say that something is wrong, and then there's another percentage, which is probably larger, that may have an inkling towards this wrongness, but no articulation or no cognitive sentence or soundbite that can kind of capture the fact that there's something missing.
Right. So with this book, we jump right into that, trying to relate to the reader, relate with the reader, that we all seem to feel something is really wrong, bad, whatever you want to say. And
That there's a universality to
we're
it.
speaking to members of the guild here as well. This book deals away with having to pander, if you will, or hold the hand of the participant and say, you know, this really is, you know, something we should be careful and watch and concerned about. No, the people reading this book, they're seeing it and they're like, yeah, you're reading my mind. Like, it's destroyed, the shit's getting destroyed. The way that we organize our companies is based on this profit and hierarchy and all that kind of stuff, linear thinking. Artificial scarcity is everywhere. It's all this narrow channel to maximize paper clips into oblivion, right? Like, people, if you see it, you see it,
I
right?
like it. Paper clips.
Just build
Just
a
bunch of
trillion paper clips. It doesn't matter if the whole world has to burn down, as long as we get our trillionth paper clip,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's what this capitalist machine, if you will, without any kind of medicine on top of it, that's what it does. That's what it do.
Yeah, it's a strange one. Another way to look at the qualitative wrongness of it is that in a capitalistic machine, shit, my point is getting lost. Hold on. Right. So in a capitalistic machine, the aim is to latch on to a supply channel, and then create the kind of changes in the context. So to change the hyper narrative of it, not the hyper narrative. Sorry, the
Meta.
no. The mythology, the hyperstition of it, to change the hyperstition around itself such that whatever it's supplying needs to be in demand, right? So
Yeah.
So what that looks like on the outside is the destruction of things that do not that's block
A company
this.
that sells knee prosthetics going around breaking people's legs.
Okay, that's a great example of a very extreme sample of that. But yeah, I guess such
Pretty much
imagery
it.
is pretty useful. It's the broken window fallacy, really,
Mm-hmm.
altogether.
Yep. And I mean, money just keeps pumping out to war and getting lost and just put into, terrorist organizational type structures and
So to qualify the zeitgeist, really, is that we are in a system of the broken window fallacy. And
that breaking shit is good for the
and,
economy.
and yeah, and then surrounded by spin after spin after spin of justification, a soundbite after soundbite, commercial after commercial, to say that this is the only way forward, this is the normal way forward, this is progress.
Yes, capitalism is the
this
best,
is
the best
good.
system of any that we've ever tried before.
Except it's the only system we've ever
Or
tried.
however they say that. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, just
ultimately.
look at where it's going. Is it acceptable? And so, anyways, we don't have to convince the member because
Yeah.
the member of the guild will
This was
intuitively
just a thought.
understand all of this. So, this is to hook the reader to. We're basically giving a promise right away that we are addressing this the proper way. We're just saying that we're on the right track. That's
Or intent. Look, the intent. Our
the intent is to be on the right track.
Yeah. And with all of these caveats in mind, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the first section. This is the bootstrap section. That's the first chapter of the first section is the zeitgeist, and then of course the charlatan. We need to come in and explain right away. Okay, now that there's this pain of the zeitgeist there. It's something that people can easily exploit and say, look, I've got the solution for you. And it's always done in a piecemeal way. And
So before we get there, I like to just hone in on the fact that the zeitgeist talks about something being missing, right? So it's a negative.
yeah,
So now we've created a void, and the charlatan.
The demand.
The importance of the charlatan is that this is a ripe void for exploitation. So now the charlatan
because
has.
there's a demand.
Exactly. Demand has been provided by as an avenue for exploitation. And yeah, so if you can fill that hole with whatever trinket you can find, and get the ball keep rolling that way through keep it transactional that way, then you've basically gone nowhere fast, and that is the problem with the charlatan, is that there's a lot of them to fill this void, because there are a lot of commodities that are able to exploit it.
Right. Well, you can go and say, oh, there's pollution in this dump waste or whatever. Okay, well, I'm a company. I've got the solution for that. I can just fix that. Meanwhile, other companies are dumping shit everywhere continuously. And it doesn't help to just clean up this one little spot.
Right.
But meanwhile, that's the solution. And do you say that's bad? No, maybe that's like an honest charlatanism, if you will. Like, I see this problem, I want to help it, but you're going after putting Band-Aids onto a ball of Band-Aids.
Yeah, you could be an incidental charlatan for sure. I would actually. This reminds me of something I used to say often, and that is a lot of people die due to good intentions. Right? Like, it's not having the full picture of the context of the problem itself, which is usually a lot larger, and is far more far more entrenched in the workings of everything at the same time, that tackling any one thing is just the problem. Tackling any one thing is just a great way to be sold on taking your time with distractions, that doing that amount to doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the intention that was wrong. It was just that it was swallowed up by the system.
Yeah, and so I've been there.
So maybe there's room for distinguishing the intentional charlatan from the unintentional.
Yeah, we've talked about that again, and we
Did we?
could just blast through this review.
What
But
I'm,
we have, yeah.
I'm asking if there's a justification for another term that is less provocative for the second category, because most people are not straight up charlatans.
Yeah, we did have a word for it.
Like charlatanism itself is the activity, but there's basically what I'm just trying to say that there's two rough categories here. One is intentional, the other is not.
There's maybe even three.
If we can articulate
Depending
it,
on
sure.
the degrees of coherence and hostility. So you can have, like, for example,
You can be clueless.
yeah, you can be, what was it, not casual, but just the not caring. You know deeply, but you don't care.
Callous.
The callousness, right? So that's another. So
Callous is the
charlatanism goes along that spectrum.
Right. So one is like planned, if you will. One is hired, and the other is basically just doesn't know better.
Yep. Something like that.
Yeah, those are good divisions, because on the one side of the spectrum, this is like very deliberate. On the other, it's completely non-deliberate. And then you have I don't have really much of a choice category,
Mm-hmm.
which fits with our current landscape.
So
pretty well.
definitely that would be content of this next chapter about charlatanism. The charlatan, how to spot a charlatan.
You know, that's cool, because degrees of coherence speak to the membership quite just in general, and this speaks to charlatanism quite in general, and hostility.
I mean, hostility.
Hostility and coherence are kind of a spectrum,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yep, we have well developed that. So, in this charlatanism section, we need to, well, so we are proposing that we at least have good intentions and a solution which is radical, if you will. So radical that most people don't even recognize it for what it is. But members do. Members
Yes.
do, and that's why we don't have to worry too much about explaining and all that kind of stuff.
In fact, the solution that we're quote unquote proposing is anything but new. It's merely a reiteration of something that has been iterated over and over many different ways
Mm-hmm.
since the dawn of time, where we had records.
So we are in this charlatan chapters, supplying kind of tools for a member to move towards mastery and towards understanding. Why is it so difficult to explain this kind of stuff? Because, well, you're always taken for a charlatan, for one, but that's normal. Everything anybody tries to convince is a form of charlatanism. We had freely acknowledged that we appear as charlatans, and maybe are, you could say, because we have.
Until we with the lack of any rapport, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's this whole thing about trust, rapport, faith. It's actually I looked it up recently in the Telegram channel. If you could just search for the word rapport, there's a triad, not a triad, there a quad. There's 4 terms. Obviously, by me. There it is.
Rapport, trust, respect, faith.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Cool.
So there's a kind of a progression that we had, but with regards to faith is the bootstrap itself, but how do you get to faith? through rapport, through trust, and respect of the which manifest the respect that is required to have faith in that what that person is doing is actually beneficial or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's the whole trajectory. Anyway.
We can get into the detail. I mean, we've been over this so many times. Like we can just blast through it, or
I wanted to mention it because I think it might be very relevant to the idea of, yes, we appear as charlatans in the book. So this breakdown, if you could just record a note of it,
right?
That all of these different factors are involved. That would be great.
At this point, yeah, of course.
No, I'm literally saying, like, take the terms and maybe like make a note of using those terms in the charlatan chapter, just in case it's useful as a descriptor of how to recognize it.
Yeah, I don't have any notes right now.
Okay.
Where's
Well,
my
I
notes?
I was just hoping it doesn't get
Where's
forgotten.
my notes?
And I am going to do my usual and take a break.
Okay.
Real quick.
Real quick. All right, then let's be right back.
Trust is the model. Respect is the activity. Faith is the outcome.
Archetype. My archetype.
But rapport being the archetype is really important, because rapport is feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's pure feedback, nothing else.
Yeah.
It ties into the record of commitment.
All right.
Anyway, I'm just
We
saying that
can
this
get-
is all
we can
calculable.
get through this. I mean, the way that I'm thinking about the book, formulating the book here, is a way that people understand.
Yeah,
Everything that we're talking about, it seems like an aside to that,
it is.
in like articulate details that nobody will understand.
You will.
So
The reason I'm
that's
trying
why
to,
I already understand it, though.
but do you well, okay, so I guess the only reason I'm mentioning it all is because I'm trying to confirm for myself that we are on that same track as when we talk about the charlatan, that there is another component of faith involved, and this component of faith is not the blind kind of faith that you're gonna give anybody, but we have like this whole articulation behind it. That is the bootstrap of faith, and so on. So that's where I wanted to get to. I wasn't trying to say that those details have to be in the book. I just wanted the note of that because I wanted to like that sort of
They will be there.
that sort of
Anyways.
arc to be in there, I guess, selfishly.
Anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's
So-
try again with me not talking so much.
So the book, we present a zeitgeist. Something is missing big time after the long process of commodification of all life. It leaves a void. There is a massive demand. Members understand this demand explicitly, and therefore we don't really have to explain it too much, but we want to say a lot of satisfying things to hook the reader into it. Then we want to explain what comes next as someone comes along and offers you a solution. That happens through a process of rapport and all that, and no matter what the demand is and what the supply is, you're always having this rapport starting up. You're having somebody who is presuming to be a teacher or who knows how to teach that to you, and then a kind of trust relationship may form or happen. This is always how it goes for no matter what industry. If you get hired on a job, it doesn't matter what skill, there's always this, everyone's a charlatan of whatever they're teaching, whoever is presuming to be in the teaching spot, if you will.
Yeah.
So that we need to talk about that because that's where supply comes along and tries to fill that. We need to fully acknowledge that we are appearing as the classic common charlatan, just like anybody else who would try to share anything that they know about anything, right? This is nothing special. This just happens to be kind of our root
Just the
core
truth, yeah.
cognitive, like perception mechanics type stuff as our subject, which happens to underpin everything else that anyone ever does in their daily life. The way that they filter and view the world around them and what kind of models they use drastically affects the outcome and what emerges into the social. And so that's our topic, and this is always confused and put in with like spiritual and religious topics, and even that presentation will shut people down right away. So
Yeah.
this is why we know we have to have the charlatan acknowledged.
I prefer to like make musical metaphors on this one, and the picture that we want to paint is with the zeitgeist. It's all like a disharmonious sort of clusterfuck of things happening.
Yep.
Whereas we're trying to say, okay, well, we can take all of these things, and if you play them in certain sequences, they can actually resonate quite well.
And music
And so we don't
is
So we don't have to get rid of anything. We don't have to, necessarily. It's not a matter of being in a different place or space or
So-
spiritually different or any of that.
I like
But
the music metaphor, and I think that I did kind of make a change, which I think you probably would agree. But so after the charlatan, I'm not urinating. That may sound like it.
I'm glad you pointed that
Just
specific,
saying,
that
I'm just
specific
saying,
interpretation
everybody,
of it out.
You can't see the waist down right now. So music is great.
So you mean this
metaphor.
bottle has nothing to do with?
Cheers.
Anyway, sorry.
So music, great metaphor, and I made a change to the ordering, just logically what I was thinking.
For which?
So the first section, we're still in the bootstrap. I want to take the chapter on coherence and put it into the bootstrap section right after charlatanism, because this
It's already straddling one end of that spectrum.
This gets right into how do you even detect charlatanism.
Right.
And it's
right,
like, okay, all that we are saying is that it's like music, and you can tell when an instrument sounds wrong.
And
we're not saying anything even in particular.
And you know what? There is actually something to literally look for, to make that distinction. That isn't like mysticism or like this what do you call it? Esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's merely looking at the fact of how transactional, right? The process is. So the more transactional it is, and the more it is geared towards that, the more towards the callous end of the spectrum it's going to be, because everything has already been reduced to number.
Yep.
Right. And the word and number spectrum is coming into play here, because on the other end of the spectrum, it's going to be it's not transactional at all. Right. It's only like, it had to be done. This had to be done. This had to be done. There's no contract involved. It was just like, that's the next logical action, right? So it's also a comment on a statement you like to make of, there's so much work to do, but just because there's no shiny coins lying around, nobody's doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Same idea.
Tragedy.
It's pretty much the same spectrum in different ways.
So the way that I wanted to introduce this, once we've got charlatanism kind of out of the way, and I'm not sure at what point like feedback observation comes in, but the next section about coherence, I want to paint the picture of one of the diagrams I've made where it's just a human head, and you kind of see inside they're having a picture of themselves and an object, and meanwhile in reality, quote unquote, there's themselves standing next to an object, right? But in their head there's a reflection of that. So what does the neurochemical operating system do? It's creating an inner kind of mapping of the outside, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where we need coherence, resonance, isomorphism.
Right. So that mapping, first of all, is incomplete. Yeah. Second of all, it's subject to what it's been constructed.
Reconnection successful. So somehow we completely lost internet connection, but anyways, so go ahead if you want.
Oh, I just realized what you did that for.
Just stick it there.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not?
So what was I saying? What were you saying? You were saying something.
This map, neurochemical.
Oh, yes.
Neurochemical map.
It actually matters what the pieces of the map are. So if you have a specific conceptual framework out of which you're working, right, how you put in the map together is going to reflect that. Some examples that I can think of off the top of my head of this effect is, it's primarily from encounters with native populations that have never seen civilized objects before, and because they had very little of reference as to what these objects could possibly be, or how they would interact with the environment, they didn't really necessarily see them as concretely as we would. So one example of this is forest-dwelling tribesmen being brought out into a savanna, and for the first time in their adult life, or life ever, and they're an adult, seeing big game animals in the distance on the grasslands. And because their depth perception was completely shaped by the forest, these animals looked to them as if they were really, really small and a lot closer. And they could not wrap their mind around the actual distance to the point of where it made them incredibly uncomfortable in that setting. Like it was just so
Yes.
the brain would not process it in the same way. It's like, so what should seem obvious
Mm-hmm.
just by looking at it was not at all obvious through years and years and years of specific cognitive conditioning. And there's another example of this when ships arrived on the beaches for native lands, forget which. The natives had a hard time looking directly at the big ships and understanding what they were seeing. Like it didn't register to them that there's an actual object. It just registered to them something's wrong with the environment. And the way one of the people was recorded to describe it is that they only started to actually understand that there was an object there when they used their peripheral vision instead of looking directly at it. And then they could kind of see the silhouette of the ship and sort of understand that there would be a 3D object that is
Yes.
of a certain space. But it's really interesting how that conditioning is going to influence the actual interpretation, the model that's being mapped back out. Anyway, again, I'm talking a lot, but I think it's a very important detail.
Yes. So,
At least to keep in mind again.
the important point, I think, for me is just the fact that a map is being created, and
I guess I was trying to speak to its nature.
yeah, so there's a quality to factor to that map. The higher resonance, the higher reflection, the higher isomorphism of what's being mapped inside with what's outside, that's kind of like an increase in quality, increase in coherence.
The quality of the map is, yeah,
Yep.
quantitatively is almost better, but still qualitatively.
Right, and so the reason to bring up a person with a map in their head is because this section of the map that we're interested in is the part of the map that maps one's own cognitive processes. So, and one's model that would be used to interpret the world around you. And at the core of cognition, of like perception mechanics, to understand perception mechanics, it kind of unlocks the quality into higher coherence levels, if you will. And so we have the degrees of coherence.
So to qualify that, this could be judged by how much more meaningful things become, as opposed to how much less or how much more meaningless things become. So that's another way to judge that spectrum here. Word to numbers is rising a couple of times now, so this is something to keep in mind.
Yep.
That spectrum is important now.
So getting into this coherence section, I don't know exactly how it works, but I want to say, like, I want to at least give an initial kind of like, you're a guest if you are, or you could say like the reader, you or listener, you are a guest right now because you are encountering these artifacts related to this Portal Mountain. That makes you a guest of Portal Mountain, a guest of the guild, at least, because you're within.
I guess is the default. Even if you're past the hostility part, right? You can still squish all of that and plunk all of that into guest, because the interaction in Portal Mountain Ethic is always guest addressing master, even if this guest is completely ignorant and hostile, right?
Right.
Within the Portal Mountain, within the Portal Mountain membership cycle, that ethic needs to be understood and responded to accordingly. But that's what shapes the interaction. So even there's a different spectrum for hostility, it's still encountered as a coherent spectrum.
So I want to give, like, right off the bat, I want to give this tidbit describing coherence a little bit, and I want to introduce it like any good charlatan. We are offering you essentially a system in which you can sort of buy into and climb, like climbing the ladder, if you will. There is an equivalent going on.
That's the egoic interpretation, yeah.
Right. So I want to present that as in, yes, there is kind of goals associated. It is a system. We are proposing like a kind of spiritual, religious type system of what people have seen in the past. Modernized, of course, to contemporary needs.
And sensibilities, of course.
Yep. But so I wanted to say, like, I wanted to give the coherence kind of spectrum, the degrees, at least the positive side. So, like, you're a guest because you're here, you're seeing, you're at least encountering, you're in the space, you're hearing words, whatever you're.
The fact of interaction.
Now, you're a participant for reading and interacting. Just by seeing it or being in its presence doesn't make you a participant, right? There's kind of something more in which something is being taken on faith.
Yeah, on the one hand side is being accepted inside the shelter, right? On the secondary part is reacting to the ongoings without necessarily any internalized model, right? So participation here is basically where I'm at, the place I'm a guest at. Well, it's not bad.
Yeah.
So performing a task here and there is not detrimental.
Right.
And so one is effectively participating, but without any further articulation as to what the participation is in. Just that
Right.
just that it isn't detrimental, and that there is some kind of goodness there, but it's not worded or
Right. Well, that's the reason why one is participating, because they are having some degree of rapport is built, trust, respect, faith.
Yeah. So all of these things come into effect into a very minimal, I guess, degree.
Right. And again, kind of, I'd like to stress that this is not only for understanding the neurochemical operating system or whatever other topics are here, but this degrees of coherence can apply to literally any trade, any task, any job for which one is trying to develop a model for, right? So we're developing a model for the thing that develops models, because that's at like kind of the core of
the thing that develops models.
that's
literally,
that's the route that we landed on. Once we dig far enough down, we landed.
And how does
there.
that affect the model building if you affect the building of the model builder, and so on and so forth?
Yes, right.
It's a vicious feedback cycle.
So yeah, it is there is the self references coming up.
Almost like unsurprisingly, it comes up almost immediately.
Right. As it has to. So, and then I just wanted to say it's okay. The participant is trying to follow along, quote unquote. Like there's a certain amount of buy-in. It's not just I'm here, whatever. I see things happening. Right. That's cool. I'll do what I want.
It's the process of building a rapport. So you're not a participant is not just sitting there willy-nilly. A participant is in the process of getting rapport up to speed, so that either there is an emergence of the other end of that spectrum of faith, or the shit show that the rapport is being built for is not coherent enough itself to be coherent with. So rapport is your measuring stick for that.
Right.
That's great. That's great.
So we just wanted to get these degrees of coherence in their very basic, most simplest presentation, going on to members, and we would describe the member as, let's say, one who already recognizes what's being said here. Like if you're following along and kind of you know it, if you know it, you know that you know it.
So the switch from participant to member can really be summed up by the fact that you realize that everybody else is quote unquote participating in the same thing, that there's just different degrees of that participation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the very realization that this is the common denominator to all participants switches the mindset into, okay, we're kind of members of the same quote unquote club due to this participation.
Right.
So this is a more of an emergent
But you would have
effect.
to have a realization of what it is that everyone is sharing in common.
Right. The details of that can be murky. What I'm saying is that it's the point at which you realize that everybody's participating in the same universal sort of game, or there's a universality to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the realization that switches from
Right.
from I'm participating in something into I'm a member of
Right.
this thing, and more to that, everybody is a member of this thing. The only difference is that the degree of that participation, right? And so membership degree of participation is consistent with that realization. Participant
Mm-hmm.
degree of that participation is not. And then you got
Yeah.
the hostility part, which is an opposing force, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then just to go on one more, you're a master if you find yourself teaching and influencing others to do the same, i.e. resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's
So-
the degrees of coherence.
So capturing expressions and sound bites that can be interpreted by participants for the sake of them realization of their membership. Like that particular set of sound bites defines the master, right?
I kind of gapped on that.
So part of our way of talking about mastery is reaching back down into the
Mhm.
participant. So what I'm saying is that a master is able to give sound bites to participants so that participants can actually interpret them and use
Yeah.
them to realize their membership.
Mhm.
So that ability to give a sound bite that moves from one to the other is the mastery of,
Mhm.
of the whole.
And when you say realize their membership, this really speaks to the inclusivity or inclusiveness of
The previous-
of the guild.
The previous way of getting to membership.
Whereas most charlatan systems will have you excluded by default, and you must
Right, okay, I
transact
see.
your way
Sorry.
in. Right?
Yeah, I kind of went on a different thought process there, but yeah, definitely. That is another.
So you don't transact
litmus-
your way into the guild.
Right.
It's something self-realized, self-understood.
Right, that transactional litmus test is a really, really good one in that sense, because, yeah, the further you are along the coherence spectrum, the more it is an inclusive realization in that, like I described the first time, when you become a member, it's not that you're different than a participant, it's just that you understand that there's different degrees of participation, and all of it is just different degrees of participation, therefore we're all members of the same club, regardless of the other differences, right? Like
Mhm,
this, it only speaks to that correlation. It doesn't speak to the details of the happenings in any different place in that spectrum.
Right. So, if we may move on.
Yes, after a break.
So after the break, we will. So that's the bootstrap section of the book. This is meant to give like the first big kind of mealy chunk that somebody is able to take forward and understand. Okay, now I know where we're at, what we're talking about. We can move on. This is to bootstrap the readership of the book itself. And with that, we will take a short break and continue on with the 4 machines.
All right.
The 4 machines. What's the rapport trick?
Rapport, trust, respect, faith, that whole schema.
Yeah.
What's really cool about it is that it's another articulation of focus.
Damn, I forgot to change the title. It's okay though. It's meeting number 41. Damn. Part 9 of the book.
So yeah, like if you're looking at the rapport litmus test, right?
Yep.
It's always about, okay, given the rapport, is there trust? Given that trust, what is the respect level to the activity that's going on? Right? If you don't trust
Yeah.
the person, you don't respect what they're doing with the activity. And then that culminates in the underlying faith, which is the allowing the moment to take enough to give the space to the model being, or the soundbite for feedback, which itself
To adopt this model chunk into your active map,
right,
if you will.
which feeds right back into rapport and continues the cycle to go into a developmental thing. So after this whole thing culminates in conviction, right? Like ultimately the entire process drops the need for faith. You don't need to suspend anything to give the soundbite a moment to see its feedback, because you've gotten the feedback. So that's what I mean there.
Right.
And then you can drop away with the entire faith process and move into conviction because you had the feedback. And of course you can feed back into the conviction and have faith in that, but that's the next cycle.
And
So there's continuity to it, and then there's an end to it, and there's more. And I think that's why people keep confusing the path to being endless. But that's a difference. Because a lot of people think that the journey, the destination is the journey, and I am not of that school of thought.
Oh, who that is? Who that is?
Oh man, it's been a while.
Dustman. How do you do?
Well, gentlemen's.
Not much. Just
You
streaming.
got to take your sip, man. Come on.
We gotta open it first.
Yes, that's part of the process.
That
No,
is
man, do
part-
it with your teeth. Sorry, I've already done it. I'm a few hands, as you can tell.
Charlatanism.
Oh yeah, we're.
Ism, schism.
Do you know about the book?
Oh yeah, there's
Okay.
a book.
There's a book.
We've been trying to take all the jargon we've been talking about and actually give it an actual arc.
Good to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we can do it for ourselves, obviously it's going to be a bit more presentable to others.
Makes sense.
A little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, and then you can keep revising and kind of add on to it at
Yeah,
any point too.
This is
Mhm.
what meeting 9.
Yeah.
So we're
Meeting
it's,
9 of
it's
the
still
book.
taking a long time. We are not
Sweet.
even. We're like we've gotten a good chunk of like what the table of contents is going to be and how it's going to go from point A to point B to point C to point C
Great.
with D and so on.
Sort of. Yep.
And
Makes sense.
we're trying to finish that actually. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good to get some hard copy down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Today we've been kind of hovering about the recap with charlatans, because one of the things that keeps coming up, right? Like, if you're putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
with saying like, oh yeah, cool, look, the world has problems and I got something to say about it, well, you don't sound like any different than every street corner preacher
Trying to sell you something.
trying to sell you a gimmick to forget about your troubles.
Right.
So we
Mhm.
dive right into like, okay, so what is charlatanism really, and how can you distinguish somebody from like, and we have like a couple of qualifications here. Some people just have good intentions, they just don't know better.
Right.
Other people have their own agenda.
Yeah, like malicious kind of intentions.
Exactly. And then there's people
Mhm.
who are for hire, they don't have any other choice. So maybe a mercenary, if you will.
That's like the average folk, I guess.
Yeah, they're too busy. They're too disgruntled, too preoccupied with everything else. All they're gonna do is the odd jobs here and there, as far as their time goes, and so they end up participating in the opposite side, selling the gimmicks,
Right.
because it's part of a market system.
To survive.
Yeah.
So
Society needs that though.
we have like these categories of like, cool, you probably don't want to get into that, but then there's like, okay, so if it doesn't become transactional anymore, if it's less about like tit for tat,
Well, society
you might-
needs it
You might
because
actually be getting somewhere.
society needs it because there's something missing.
Right.
That
has-
doesn't go away with the trinkets, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but again, everybody kind of has their place in society too. So once you realize
I always
that,
argue about that from a perspective of my place in this moment is not my place in the next or the next or the next.
well, that's where you as
And
an
a lot of-
individual can change your situation as well.
Yeah, but a lot of people have a hard time with that because they will look like, no, you're this, and that's the end of it, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. Well, you can be more than one thing at the same time.
it
too.
gets worse. It gets worse if if it gets written down on paper, because then you can just keep going back to the piece of paper and be like, what this?
Right.
And you're like, oh fuck. But
Yeah.
that was yesterday.
Yeah. I guess at the same time, you don't want to really limit yourself either.
Yeah, that's my that's my my personal kind of like take on that, is that I don't like that thought process in general, just because I learn. You know,
Well,
like,
yeah, that's it. You'll adapt.
If
you'll
I
grow.
say something
People
like,
change.
if I say something that is incredibly insulting to you today, which I've done to other people too, it doesn't mean I meant it, and it doesn't mean like if I did, it doesn't mean I can't turn a switch inside my head, go, wait, that was a dick fucking move to do, and
Right.
agree with and be self-critical at that point,
Yeah.
and criticize the same person that
People
did
change.
it, and not be that person again,
Right.
right? Like,
As long as you can recognize it and grow.
well,
That's the hard part.
that's been my struggle, if you will, because I tend to
Yeah.
I like patterns, right? So if I see a pattern, I'll learn from it.
Right.
But I've had that doesn't translate into like reconciliation or anything like that.
Well,
I have some bad memories.
that's part of the growing up process, is being able to admit when you're wrong and kind of admit, like,
I was really drunk at the time.
make like reconciliations with a person, like you said.
I was really drunk at the time, and I thought it was like he knew me enough to be like, it's cool. So I made a comment about weight, and fucking. I find out a couple of years later that I'm like the worst person in the world, and
Who's that?
And their entire family hates me. It's Cameron. Cameron's
God.
brother. Cameron's brother, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
people
it's
are
bizarre.
sensitive
And
to
I had no
certain
idea.
aspects of their life, I
But-
guess.
But I had no idea, right? Like for
Yeah.
me, I was like, so for me, I was drunk first of all. So my filters were not on,
Right.
and the comment was he lost a lot of weight, but then he gained it back,
Oh, okay.
right? So I was just like, oh well, that's kind of disappointing, kind of deal.
Easy come, easy go.
Yeah. Apparently, like I hear, like 2 years later, his wife fucking lost it on me because like how rude and
Oh, God.
all that shit, and I'm like, dude, you never even mentioned anything.
Yeah, well, that's maybe equally his fault for
Oh no,
not
at this,
bringing it
at
up
this
again,
point,
or
it's,
like
we're five.
leaving unresolved.
This is
kinda-
5 years in now. This is only a stickler for me because this is how I learn.
Right.
This is like an I use this as an example of how what I'm talking about learning, right, and changing and all that shit. That was a mistake,
Yeah.
but yeah, this
As long as you
person
can learn from it, like you said.
because his other brother is basically like family to me, right? Like
Oh,
so,
yeah.
so it's just awkward too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, I think it's if it's been lingering this long, it's obviously his fault for holding on to it.
I'm
And then if you didn't know, right, you
it's-
can't really resolve it.
I'm over it. I make no apologies now, simply because it's a little bit too long to hold on to something this stupid.
That's what I'm saying, right? Like it's
It's
You
an
did
obvious it's an obvious fucking misstep, but whatever. Like, cool. Anyway.
well, like you said, as long as you can learn from it too.
Yep.
People change.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I like having examples because then I don't talk out of my ass. That's what
It helps.
That's what this is for me now.
Yeah, it helps.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah. So charlatans and how to
Well,
recognize it.
Typically, like charlatans are just trying to sell something, right? Like an ideology or goods or.
We were
Mhm.
we just kind of got here, and that's because we gotta keep talking. But we notice a pattern in that with the more you're charlatan-like, the more there's transaction going on.
Right.
So buy sell kind of stuff.
Yep.
Buy my self-help book, or buy my crystals, buy my whatever.
Right.
And then on the other hand is like, all right, well, this is all I know. If it works for you, like, cool, let's keep going.
Right.
Build a rapport, build trust, building actual relationships. No transaction in sight.
Right.
So you gotta kind of you gotta titter like you can weigh against.
Yeah,
It's
but
kind
the
of
word
ironic.
charlatan has kind of a negative connotation. Like you've got
Yeah.
insincere kind of.
Well, that's why I actually was wondering if we
Objectives,
need.
right?
I was actually wondering earlier if we need new words because I picked up on that, and then we had those three categories of like person with good intention that just gets other people killed.
Right.
There's that charlatan, like the sincere mother who is like, won't somebody please think of the children, is usually not the best person to put in charge of
Right.
anything to do with the rest of society.
Well, what's the difference between a prophet and a charlatan then?
the salesmanship.
This comes up
No,
in the
I need to make a
machines.
distinction.
So
This comes up in the machines because
it is
the
a bit on an abstract.
tech,
but-
standard charlatan is a function of ego, that transactional market nature, right?
Right.
When
Plugs
when
right
the,
back into the market system.
when the charlatan arises out of the ego and uses ego structure to try and solve what the ego did, right?
It's just
To
gonna
make things a cold machine like transactional market nature, right?
It's going to try to find what other part of myself can I whore out
It's
to make the
ironic.
situation better.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, the whoring out part is an interesting angle
So,
too. 'cause
according to the book,
you don't whore yourself out as much on the other side of the spectrum.
according to the book, we're laying out these 4 machines that kind of latch on top of each other. So the self machine is just like if like let's say what your neurochemical network in your brain does to if a tiger comes out of the grass.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I'm a body,
Pump
that's a
adrenaline.
threat.
Fight or flight.
This body needs to be the fuck out of here,
Right.
right? So
Pump
that
adrenaline, get the muscles
in that
going.
moment you have a self arising, which is natural, you could say. Right?
Yeah.
It's just your
Move me
your
out of
brain
here.
has mapped
Oh,
yourself
like fight
away.
or flight. Like I said.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Well, yeah, the autopilot part is really important here.
So in a
because
way,
Some people run towards danger. Some people run away from it.
some people freeze.
Some people freeze up and get killed like right instantly. So, I mean, you have
yeah,
3 responses, I guess, right? Technically.
right. The point is that it's kind of a natural phenomenon to have it to objectify yourself in your own map inside your head to say this is a body, this
Right.
is a self. It comes from a self-reference because all your senses seem to be hooked in and attached to this body.
Right.
Right, so that's natural. The ego machine sits on top of that
It makes it permanent.
and bends things in a way, yeah, to make
It takes that self, like so in the case we just described, that self arises, but once the danger passes, it's no longer necessary and
Right.
just whatever. It's back to just existence. When you layer out an ego on top of it, it's like you write out, oh, okay, so this self happened on paper today.
Right.
So this self needs to move to the next stage, and that's the next transaction and the next transaction. So it gives it like a permanence to something that isn't like really permanent, and it kind of flares up and down.
Right.
And it just puts it on
Mhm.
record on paper. If it's easier to see it on paper because you have an identification number, right? Like that's what those are the kinds of things that keep you permanent, even though day to day, you didn't wake up today with the memories of tomorrow. For example,
Right.
right? There is a shift going on, and it
Yeah.
doesn't recognize any of that,
So I guess you're just trying to track it so you can recognize patterns and potentially. Like,
and make it a real thing to consider in every moment ongoing, because you're not the same person, and that's the hard part of our cell, if you will.
Right. So then the hijacking machine comes in with false threats. So then you need to recognize when this isn't like a necessary kind of.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
hijacking machine can actually be more recognized by the fact that it keeps trying to slot you right back into the pre-existing slots, and
Right.
only allows evolution according to the progression of what is in those slots, as opposed to who you are,
Right.
and what you've been today, as opposed to yesterday, as opposed to and
right.
so on and
That's
so
the
forth.
artificial scarcity.
It disconnects you completely
and
from that
the
process.
calcification of your being into narrow channels.
Right. So like
especially yeah, which are grounded and anchored in affect, in conceit, what we call, which is this.
Affect just being pleasure, pain, and neutrality kind of.
So that
response
those
to events.
feelings can happen to you. That's what the ego latches into. It's narratives of
Right.
what
Pain-
justifies its
pain
existence.
is bad. Avoid pain. How do I create a narrative of the self that does not come back into this painful situation?
And you start
Yeah.
you start latching onto these anti-pain narratives that are just locked into your being.
Yeah.
It constantly.
But it could be like a
And you can
crutch
see-
too,
and you
though,
can
right?
see
It
the
can
more-
become
Yeah,
like unhealthy.
like from trauma, even like to
Yeah.
keep
And the
avoiding
more-
the situation, but you're locking yourself into a narrow channel of reality.
Yeah, and you're never getting out of it either. It's
And
like
to
a
note,
loop.
and to notice here, the more these stories keep spinning, the more this quote unquote self becomes a real thing, a real tangible thing. Whereas before, we were saying it rises and it passes away naturally in situations. Now there's no situations. It's just
Right.
there and there and there. So the fight or flight response is constantly active,
Yeah.
which is the unnatural state of things. This is the wrongness, the feeling of wrongness that is happening.
Right.
To which, again, the charlatan is like, oh, you feel something is wrong, let me sell you a trinket to fix it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it just keeps going the same loop, though.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's
And then-
like a crutch basically. So you're just
And
kinda
so-
never
Yes.
really dealing with the problem. You're just
And
kind
yeah.
of like putting a band-aid on it for
And now
temporary.
the hard part is to go, okay, like we appear as charlatans because we're kind of saying the same thing,
Right.
but with all these additional layers on top to watch out for, you can see what charlatanism really is and how we may not.
So this, I think,
particularly be
answers your question of what is a prophet then as opposed to a charlatan, and I think that the prophet is the one who goes beyond this ego machine, this hijacking machine, and tries to bring back the next machine on top of that, which is the medicine machine.
Right.
which
Wait.
points it all out.
Right, which makes a model of this and utilizes that ego dynamics in its own ways, which kind of shifts things away from that and back into the natural kind of rise
By
and, rise and
pointing
fall.
out how it's
Right.
fluffy, how it's not necessary.
Yeah. It seems like it's more like a selfless kind of gesture of like
Yeah,
you know,
it's the ult-
improvement or like helping kind of your common
So,
man.
so,
in
so,
a
on
way.
so on the one hand side, you
Mhm.
have conceit, what's in it for me. On the
Right.
other hand side, you have what we termed as the opposite of that, altruism, where you don't consider the self in the grander scheme of what is happening. So
Right.
you don't put that object into the full thing, and you're just
Yeah.
like, it's just what is.
Right. So you're trying to move this system, not necessarily with selfish intentions or like, you know, thinking about
Exactly.
your own end goals in the end. It's like
Or your
more
own
of like
pain,
a,
your own pain and pleasure.
a
And by-
movement kind of, right?
And by
like
pointing
you're-
out that this is not the purpose of it, this is the purpose of charlatanism. You know, like
Right.
we're building the basis of like, okay, this is how we're moving away from starting out
Mhm.
as your typical charlatan and actually saying something
right, yeah.
apart from that.
Hmm.
That is just
But-
the first sections.
But I think maybe as like a prophet, you don't necessarily need control or like your ego isn't driven by.
I think it
Um,
depends on what you mean by it, because there's a different interpretations to that word.
For sure. Yeah.
I hear prophet and I immediately think of the charlatan.
Yeah, of course.
Well, but there's got to be a distinction between a good charlatan and
Right.
a bad charlatan, and even distinguish
Or a
again
non- or
that
a
it's not a
non-
charlatan at all, right?
The
It's like
non-charlatan. Yeah, and I think you're trying to use the word prophet to point to the non-charlatan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and see, and
It's
this
like-
is the difficult thing, is that because you can't be told that, it's a matter of building rapport, processing feedback, seeing if what they say matches what they do, seeing what
Yeah.
what they say matches what I am feeling.
Right.
All of these things are all of these things true. So now it's your fucking work. It's a lot of work on you
Right.
to go, okay, well, I've been told of this shit. Now what? Right?
Right. So maybe a prophet is just like something with that doesn't have the essence of ego involved.
Yeah. Like this is
Right,
exactly
it's-
this is not having. It's not about not having the essence. It's always recognizing what it is. Kind
Yeah.
of, because
And keeping that in check, maybe too.
yeah.
Right. Like
Because there's no perfect, aside from the Christ or the mythological
Right.
Buddha.
perfect- yeah.
yeah.
So that's why mythologies always have the perfect figure as like the okay, what's next kind of a
Right.
idea.
But you have to always kind of value yourself under God, right? You can never have that mind state of like being a god, or you know, in a way, I guess you're a god of your
Yeah.
own world or your own perception, right? You create your own reality.
You know what really helps me
but-
with Christianity, with the God thing?
Yeah.
Specifically, if you look at this Christ, the Son, as the gentle nudge before the event to reconsider,
Right.
and,
Like a conscience almost.
right? And the Father as the wrath part of, if you allow the event to happen, the consequence of it.
Right. Yeah.
So
The judgment.
So so they're both part of the same thing, really. But whereas one is gentler,
Right.
and the other is a lot less gentler, if you will.
Yeah, that's like the paternal maternal kind of
There-
connection as
sure,
well,
uh,
right?
Christianity has a lot of problems with women, so they don't like mothers
Well,
as much.
yeah, I guess.
Virgin Mary notwithstanding, I don't even know what.
Oh, Mary
that's
Mary
all about.
Magdalene, they didn't really look too kindly on her either, but
Yeah, the whore.
Mm,
Oh man, yeah. Let's not get into any crazy
Oh no,
theories about that. But
It's funny. It's funny that they would reject those characters because the metaphor is that we're all the whores. We are.
right,
We are.
we're all sinners.
Christ,
We're all
Christ is the one who is unconcerned enough to simply say, "Cool,
hmm
you know, you are who you are. This is what it is, and what follows is what will follow."
right. And I guess we could draw a parallel with like reconciliation and things like that, because in real life, interpersonal things, you wrong somebody, that's going to be on both of your minds. So you need to be able to bring about like, okay, we had this problem, this happened,
Yeah.
I feel bad about the situation, and move on.
Or I feel
Right,
great about the
you know.
situation, and you're a fucking asshole.
But that's
Let's
where
move-
ego. That's
let's
the
move on.
unhealthy ego comes in, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, I'm just devil's advocate.
Right, but
Yeah.
that's where we can make a connection there with everyday life, right? Is,
Oh, yeah.
yes, you can sin, but try not to, clearly. If it happens, recognize that it was a
But-
sin, it was wrong,
But even like,
and
but
reconcile
but
with
you know what-
whoever you
but-
wronged, or...
you know what's funny
know?
about that is that it expects an objective sort of understanding of what is sin and what is not, and
That's morality, too, though.
I got some things to say there.
Right? It's how you were raised.
Yeah, no, for sure.
There's obviously things like laws that are established, and they're pretty common amongst most religions, right? Don't kill, don't steal, don't fuck your friend's
So-
wife.
Yeah,
you know?
you know what?
It's-
You know why they're so consistent? They're property laws.
Uh,
They
Yeah,
all
sure.
they all amount to recognizing the reality of property as opposed to not. That's the significant difference.
nah,
You don't have
In a
these
way.
laws appearing in more tribal societies because they are non-coercive. They don't tell each other what to do.
It's
But
an
there's-
attempt at
they-
medicine.
they-
there's
they rely on the
accepted kind of
course,
norms.
They
that,
rely
you
on
know,
the fact that if you're still alive by this point, you figured it out. And
But
and there's a great
It's based on honor as well.
yes, there's a great.
Right.
Let me put it this way: there's a great interest in talking like to you about who you are and everything like that, but never a compulsion to fix anything about you. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, that shouldn't
you-
be on anybody else. It should just be on yourself.
the thought doesn't occur that there's something to fix. It's even beyond that. We are raised in a society that's like we have one set of objective truths. We can get to it by formula, right? And if you can't figure out the formula, you're kind of behind,
Right.
right? So it's another form of coercion as to how things need to be seen. Now, I'm not saying that this is the most evil thing about our society. Don't worry about that.
Right.
I'm perfectly fine with my programmer mind, whatever. What I'm saying is that level of coerciveness does not even exist in these societies. So the idea of telling you what you should ever be doing with your life, or this is right, this is wrong, or any of those things,
Right.
it doesn't occur to them. If you misstep, you're going to get your upcomings or whatever,
Right.
right, for being a...
If there's
pissing-
established
pissing the
rules
ro-
that are
if you're-
known.
Yeah, there's always
kinda-
taboos. There's always taboos. I mean, people do speak the same language,
Right.
right? They have the same demons, if you will. But nobody tells everybody else, like, believe in the devil or else. It's more like, well, the story about the devil goes like this, and everybody is left to make sure to make their own decisions about how they would want to proceed in that context, right?
Right.
So storytelling was great. People listened to each other a lot and very interested in who the person was. But
Right.
beyond that, not even children. That's the crazy part. Children are not coerced, not told to what to do unless they just can't figure it out.
What do you mean? That's all they're told to do.
I mean, in these societies, children are often not instructed in any way. They're just observing and participating with, like, most of the activities are also
I don't know about
participatory.
that, man. That's a
In tribal
reach.
societies? It's a
You don't think the parents teach their kids right?
they
from
taught what they didn't do is coerce. So
I don't know how
if
you
a
could
kid
prove that.
if a kid could figure something out for themselves, they would generally just watch and not interfere.
Right.
If they couldn't and needed help, or if it was definitely beyond their means, they would intervene and show, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, the relationship grew out of kids mimicking parents, right?
Oh yeah.
And why this is actually weighing on me a little bit is because I'm having kids. I can't do that.
It's Eon.
I'm completely broken away from that capacity to parent, because if I don't intervene in their behavior, somebody else will.
Right.
And so all of this, what I said, is complete nonsense to the civilized mind, obviously.
Yeah, I don't
And
know
like-
where
and
you
it-
got the idea that the
Oh,
parents
this
wouldn't do
is
anything.
research.
That doesn't
This
seem
this
right.
is this still exists in the Inuit society.
Oh,
Like there's examples of it right now. It's dying out. Don't get me wrong. It's completely dying out because it's
Yeah.
shunned essentially by the rest of us. But you also see this a lot in uncontacted tribes.
yeah.
Like an example I saw. I forget the place. They were black and in the jungle, so I'm assuming somewhere in Africa. But they live in in tops of trees. They built houses out of like raw material and shit, and about 200 feet up in the air.
Oh well.
The kids don't have any special enclosure, like 3-year-olds and shit, standing like just hanging off of fucking the place like it's nothing,
Seems irresponsible.
right? You'd never see this here, and and yet they don't have a huge amount of accidents as you would imagine.
It is the number one cause of death, but
Yeah. I mean,
No, but it's
only half
it's
the
not
ones.
it's not common. It's not that it wouldn't even be that common that you could laugh at it this way.
only 50% of the kids die.
yeah.
No way. No way. They have enough sense not to do it.
I don't know, man.
So let's like at least have in the context of these machines that we're talking about. So a coercive parent is taking that ego machine stance. We're gonna just take a break because I had kind of too, but the coercive parent says, "Do it this way, or I'm gonna hit you."
Right, like negative
Or
reinforcement.
if you do this, then you get a chocolate, right? You're
Positive
just installing the ego type
rewards.
thing, the reward punishment mechanism, the transactional nature of it, right?
Right.
And that, I think, is what he's probably trying to say, is that it doesn't really need to exist in a tribal society, that type of shaping the behavior, because we see and we do, right? The
Right,
kids
yeah.
will see what people are doing and they'll do it too. So that's not tough. But if you have like this society where everything is kind of linked in with transactional nature, and you have to be a certain way to fit in,
Yeah.
you know, don't scream and all this stuff, or you know, you'll get your ass beat when we get home and
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. Well, then you conform, right?
Right, if you can get the kid to make the right decisions on their own, that's the ideal situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I get
It shouldn't have to be that everything that they know of their behavior is based on, I'm going to get my ass beat, or I get a chocolate or an ice
that.
cream.
Right, yeah.
And that's all they're
You
thinking
need to do
of.
it for yourself. Kind
So
of
then their ego is up and running the whole time, thinking, okay, I'm worrying, anxiety about, you know, all the things that get my ass beat,
Right.
and also desiring about what kind of rewards I could get. So
Right, and then-
your kid raises up into the transactional nature, right?
Right, yeah.
So that's why the parents don't have to, in a little tribal society, the oral tradition and all that, you wouldn't have to
Sorry, guys.
That's the mucho?
muchos.
I'm
You wouldn't have
very
to.
hungry.
Nice. No doubt.
Good calls.
Oh, pork like a good Jewish man.
Of course. Is there any other meat?
Oh, that's Dustin is
Jews'
off
favorite.
screen, and it's another burrito coming up. Eon seems to
Very-
be watching the live stream right now.
It's kosher.
Welcome, buddy. Yeah, so I'd like to just keep things in the context of these 4 machines at least.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so and
Without getting it too overcomplicated.
and I think like the charlatan tries to do this medicine layer. Like the charlatan latches onto the fact that the ego layer is destroying everything because it's unimpeded. There's no, it's like a runaway, breakaway processes
Self-sustaining.
that just cause people to go into this reward punishment transactionary society,
Right.
and which ends up destroying the shit out of everything all over the place.
Yeah. Causing a lot of unnecessary pain.
So
It's also
charlatans,
narcissism.
It's distracting you from learning about nature itself.
so
Because
it's
you're
like
so
a
busy doing
it's like a
transactions.
false medicine. These trinkets that would be given to you because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't ultimately cure the patient.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like an
Placebos.
artificial reward.
Placebos.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's the structure that the book has taken on. Is first is Bootstrap talking about the charlatan, and also the zeitgeist of like how everything just seems like it's blowing up and exploding. The world is just going to hell, and it feels like really bad. Everything looks like it's kind of going to hell.
Yeah. I think that's like the media's responsibility too, though. You know, like creating a hypersensitive kind of state,
Oh yeah, it's all
dividing
connected.
people into
Right.
tribes.
And then what solutions do they provide?
Consume.
More zeitgeist.
consume.
War,
War and yeah, materialism.
push war. Yeah, it's insane. Yep. Yeah.
Good
so
old zeitgeist.
4 machines. Then you've got. So we need to express right away what is this neurochemical system, operating system that's creating a self object and an ability to interpret the environment around you.
Right.
And this is what's being hijacked by the ego, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
What-
Getting those false dopamine
What it
spikes.
is, what it
Yep.
is, how is it vulnerable? How has that vulnerability been exploited? What's the consequence of this vulnerability? And what's the path? What's the
Right.
way forward after the fact?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so-
guess just like recognizing whenever you're getting hijacked.
Eon asked what the 4 machines are about, and this is what I've been kind of ranting on it for the last couple weeks since I kind of discovered it. But yeah, so
VSM?
What's-
VSM?
systems model,
That's mine.
or what was that? I know it. On the tip of my
Mind
tongue,
if I
but
smoke a
essentially
little
the
Nope.
self. So I kind of recategorize these 4 machines, but yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
some of
like
them are
a
This conversation's interesting.
generic self machine which creates the self object, which relates the self to the environment out there. It does this by creating this inner map, and which is supposed to have a quality to it. A higher quality means better outcomes, more isomorphism,
That's
more
the one,
like
yeah. Better
like
isomorphism. Clarity.
like a symphony, if you will, right?
Mhm.
So the better quality of the map that this self machine is creating, the better everything.
And I'd say a lot of it can be qualified as the less it's about the how and the more about the what, the more clarity there is. Because with the tendency towards the what, the big picture of the why is actually lost in translation, and the outcomes are not compared to it. So if the process itself creates a lot of garbage, right, as part of its own processing, then none of that is accounted for in the why are we doing this?
Yep.
So like what I'm trying to
Complex adaptive
What I'm
system
trying to dig at-
stacking.
it's the difference between having meaning behind actions and just being mechanical behind actions.
Yep. So the 4 machines, just to summarize, so the self is almost answers the question of what is being hijacked. So we're having these, in the book, we're trying to set up this really kind of generic neurochemical operating system, this machine, and
Yeah.
just the facilities, the raw facilities of the human that are getting hijacked, right? So that's the first machine that we want to talk about. It doesn't have any bad connotations to it. The bad connotations are once we get into the ego machine, or what we've called the hijacking machine, right?
It tends to notice that biology works mechanically, which is why machine is not necessarily a bad term. It's just a segue.
It's a term that I think is intuitively understood.
Yeah, in that it has a physical reality or an objective
So
algorithm.
we have this machine that presents the experiencer with an idea of the self. The self comes up through the self-reference, through
Conceit.
through
the
senses.
So self-reference is always there. Self is the conceit calculation projecting itself onto a narrative.
So if we can just continue here,
Sure.
self machine. That's your baseline basis.
I'm bad.
This is the machine of generic life, of what is happening when an animal or human or whatever is understanding itself as an object in order that the body can be controlled in an environment, right? It's like a
Yeah.
virtual representation. So
Yeah.
these facilities, this is also, we would put this close to the polymorphic machine. These facilities are kind of generic, and they end up getting hijacked due to conceit and
So wait,
affect.
what's the distinction between the self and the polymorphic machine that you're making?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just saying we
Um,
previously referred to this same area
Oh, okay, okay. I
as
see what you're saying.
the polymorphic machine is a generic type of thing. It doesn't have the bad connotations to it.
Okay.
Then you introduce the ego machine on top of that, which is kind of like this calcification, this almost like perversion of this
Monomorphic.
self machine into something that chases after desires or that tries to avoid pain. So that chasing after and avoiding pain ends up twisting and warping your view of how yourself should behave in an environment. And through the ego machine, that action, your actions taken,
Right.
can become very selfish, as we say, because
So-
all it is turned towards a transactional nature, such that somebody can say to you, do this or I'm going to beat your ass, and then guess what? You're going to do it. Right? So your body, whether you internally feel that's an isomorphic action to do or whether it's moral or ethical,
It's completely overridden. Yeah.
doesn't matter. This ego machine is taken over and you are simply avoiding pain. So your ego comes up in place of the self, on top of the self, as a special self that doesn't go away, right? And it's constantly there fearing these things that can go wrong. And again, the behavior is then warped and twisted away from this rise and fall of the polymorphic machine,
Of
or
what's happening,
just the
yeah.
self, of the moment, like what the moment calls for, and you have this installed ego, which is always there in the moment, saying, "You better do
That-
this. You
that
better
says
worry about
present-
that. You better think about that. You
Yeah.
better chase that." It hijacks
More like
the
look,
machine.
The
facilities.
concept of self-preservation is actually echoing really strongly here, in the sense that
Yep.
there is some kind of self to preserve, and therefore all actions need to be geared towards that preservation, which is itself a kind of a market relationship
Right.
already, in that this self-preservation costs this much now, this much for this, like it's not about like the actual money or whatever, but it's like the activity that you now forced to exert out that has nothing to do with your own needs at all.
or those around you, or
but-
the environment, or the world, whatever.
but just
at
for
large.
but just for the sake of staving off the environment as it is now, coming back in and just pulling you apart.
So this always happened even in tribal society. When we had oral tradition, what we call the medicine machine, which then sits on top of this ego machine, the medicine machine was there to check it and to kind of allow it to dissolve and pick it apart at special points, which allow those structures to dissolve and for the ego self to go back where it came from, basically.
So would you
Keeps
say
it in check.
Yeah.
So would you say it's a kind of a negative feedback transactions
It has to be
for the ego.
for
in
the
that
ego machine.
The more the ego transacts with it, the less pain it has, but by definition, the less it wants to transact at the same time. If you kind of know what I mean, or rather, transactions that make transactions unnecessary. So finding that final transaction would be like a metaphorical way to put it, and it's in that it's so good you just don't need anything else. Like
The medicine?
yeah, like that final transaction is so good that once you've performed it, like you don't see a further need to continue to play the game.
Right.
Which is very abstract, I know, and it doesn't say anything about anything really, about what that looks like, except for just clarifying how we're approaching these ideas after we've described them. Right.
Ian made a comment there about the proximity complex as emergent from the self machine, and probably what's also being hijacked by the ego machine to derive the structures of what is to be desired or averted.
So the proximity complex is the self-reference as it appears. There's 6 categories to it.
This is like being part of something being part of the self.
Yeah, so I am part of this, or it is part of me.
So that would be hijacked too. Of course.
And then
I am part of this company.
This
Right.
is not a part of me. I forget the third permutation, but anyway, there's like these categories of like where the self is inside the structure, or the structure is me, the structure is not me. So there's like these two. So this is the proximity complex.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the self in the proximity to whatever it is? That's the complex.
So that's getting reified by this transactional nature of affect, of to avoid pain and to go after desire.
Just to finish off the thought, though, self-reference appears as those 6 categories in this idea. So whenever you have a delineation of self inside, self in it within self, and all of those things, that's the self-reference being referred to. The next phase is where that self-reference should be. If I'm outside, should I be inside or should I stay outside? So that's the calculation of conceit, in terms of I am above where I need to be, I am below where I need to be, or I am where I need to be. And then that carries over to the narrative of creating the self-object to say myself was in the correct place at the right time, myself was not correct at the wrong time, and all of these different outflows that can be had if you were to make that calculation. So the proximity complex never goes away, but that calculation is not necessary. And that's the biggest difference between spinning the narratives and not spinning the narratives and staying within the same narrative. Oh, it's just a conceit calculation. Oh, it's just another conceit calculation. And it just you stay static within the same loop, as opposed to being dragged by the horse, if you will, through everything else.
Right. So that's how that gets hijacked. The proximity complex definitely gets hijacked, but the medicine is taking you back to this.
Yeah. So both sides are available naturally from the flaring origin, in terms of I need to get away from tiger, self needs to move,
Right.
which is normal. We don't want to shit on that. But when only this is acting and it's no longer a tiger, but it's your taxes, or it's your ex, or it's your whatever.
Something that's causing you grief.
Something that's an idea but not a reality.
Right.
And only exists in the minds of people. That's when we start to say, okay, there's a runaway system going, because none of it is feeding back into the people experiencing these things.
Right.
And all for what?
Right.
Is this what we are born to do? Fuck with ourselves? That doesn't sound right. That's the zeitgeist coming back again.
Right.
That's wrong.
It's like whenever you realize you've got a hypersensitive perception of reality, basically.
And it just doesn't fit.
And like kind of analyzing it and breaking it down into priorities, maybe, of how you can solve the problem, right? To make it easier on your own mind.
Just the idea alone.
Right, so you don't get overwhelmed with all this.
But just billions of years of evolution to do what? to talk about how somebody looked at you wrong, or how somebody dissed
Right.
you, or like any of these like random tidbits that just destroy the whole fucking thing.
And that's
out
where
of,
your
out of
ego machine
existence.
is hijacking your experience, right?
Right. This is where you can see it totally does not work for the species that it's in.
Right, yeah.
It's
Going against nature in a way.
and it's very artificial.
Yeah.
And it's it's a dead machine in that it behaves like a grinder, right? It just processes shit and spits out garbage at the end of the track.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
Landfill, literally the landfill. It's just you set up a factory, grab your shit,
Yeah, and if
sell it, and
if
then
you're-
it ends up in the garbage.
and if you're completely ego driven, you're going to be a narcissist, and you're going to be putting your needs above everybody else's at all times, right? And you want
That's
to steer
just-
away from that as well.
That's just an extreme
right?
example
Like,
of the
yeah,
same
that's
cycle.
but that's like what the end kind of
What's
what you
interesting
can
there,
result.
though, what's interesting there,
Like-
it doesn't absolve us from being on these spectrums.
Right.
We are narcissistic because we participate to some degree in all of that. We are neurotic because we're tethered by this ego to continuously avoid the pleasure. But still, even I am in this conversation realizing all of this. This is the case
Yeah.
for me, right? So
Insecurities.
it's not just that. It's like the admittance to that there is a neurosis to it,
Right.
Like a mental dysfunction in my own head that is still to be overcome. Like this is
Like
not
not overanalyzing
it's not-
things, right?
Yeah, it's not like you have a problem and I have the solution. No, we all have. This is the other part of the charlatan.
We all
Right.
sin, quote unquote.
Speak.
Right.
It's not a matter of me saying here like, dude, I totally have this figured out. No,
Yeah.
like I'm just at the same time subject to this neurosis, and by
yeah,
extension,
you can't be like that. The ego machine, like you were saying, is even present in the tribal type of setting where
Yeah.
the aversion and
taboos.
desire and all that kind of stuff kind of pushes you around because you don't want to feel pain, right?
Right.
You want to feel pleasure,
and you want to
right?
feel acceptance.
So that affect portion is something that's always going to be there, nagging at you, quote unquote, to like correct yourself,
Mhm.
so that you don't feel that pain, even though what you're doing may be helping yourself and others.
What would be missing
right?
is
Very
the
painful.
What would be missing is that what I was alluding to earlier, without the coercion part, nobody would be badgering you your whole life to fix it up. So the neurosis behind fixing it all up and what is reward and what is punishment isn't going to be derived from the social system, but from your actions
Right. It makes you more self-reliant.
and reliable.
You can come to the solutions on your own and figure out how to get
Yeah.
yourself out of
A
a
world-
specific situation.
A world so far away from our minds that is not even funny. It's really it's sad how far away from us this is at this point.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about how your mind works and thought processes and how
Yeah.
you can build up things in your mind and be able to deconstruct them at the same time. Right?
Yeah, but at
Realizing
the same
what
time,
real threats are, artificial threats are.
but
You know,
given all
prioritizing your
given
course
all
of
this,
action.
though, given all this, that we arrived at the fact that we are all on the spectrum of what we call stupidity
Yeah,
by taking representational things to be the reality of things. So if our formula conforms to something, we think the formula is real, as opposed to just an just one way of looking at something.
yeah,
The other thing is that this neurosis that I was talking, tethered to punishment and reward, so stupid, neurotic, psychotic, because all of that is affecting how we perceive things, and so we're deluded as fuck as to how we are even perceiving our own reality. Cool, we can take out objects and not think that they are, that a big buffalo in the distance is a small fly close by. Cool, we're past that point, but we're not past the points we don't know about, what we've trained our mind to do for this is at the expense of training it to do something else, like recognizing the qualitative aspects of people
Right.
and not thinking of them as slotted individuals in a machine. So we're totally lacking on that part of our educational, if you will, value.
right.
So yeah, we got our 3D world figured out, but cool. But at the expense of humanity, essentially, right? Like it's that's again the zeitgeist's conversation. Something's fucking wrong.
Right.
So that's the nature of what's wrong, really, and we mentioned this thing called polymorphic machine. I don't know if you know what the word means, but it's a machine that assumes many forms depending on where it is. So if it's in this case, it works like this. If it's in that case, it works differently. It might not even look like the same species.
Right.
So humans are a lot like that.
So that's like natural instincts.
Yeah. So shifting for me, shifting from being a father to being just one of the guys here to shifting to being like my own person between different situations.
Right.
That comes naturally, but because of the way we have our IDs and the way we are on paper, like we tend to gloss over this shiftiness of our character as in different contexts, and almost to the point of where we would call it being not genuine or something to that effect. Meanwhile, it's just responsive behavior, right? Like it doesn't have to be looked at as an evil, because the consistency isn't found necessarily in my personal consistency is not found in how I relate to my job or my government or like my anybody in the official stance. It only has any consistency within the realm of individual people that I'm friends with.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
You can't identify yourself as one particular thing, basically, right?
So it makes it ludicrous from the systemic point of view to view me as one person, yet it insists on it.
Right.
Meanwhile, my reality only exists outside of that realm entirely. All of my consistency is outside of that.
Right.
And that's just personal experience, but I'm pretty sure it makes sense because it's the same experience.
Sure. It's all in your perception, though, right?
Well, whatever spin I go with, right? What's the commercial that I'm advertising at the moment?
Right. Well, and you can also recognize whenever your perception might be a little off or steering down like a more negative kind of path.
Well,
and
that's the hope.
Almost,
if you're looking for it.
But just recognize certain pitfalls that you're falling into a certain trap that's.
But in a world where you're mostly punished for looking at it, let alone given a chance to, with your time, to do anything about it.
Punished for talking about it.
You're punished for talking about it. You're punished for thinking differently. You're punished for a variety of different. And punishment, I don't mean like necessarily beaten or killed. I just mean like it goes anywhere from you're cool, you're like one of those smart guys,
Right.
Which is basically another euphemism for I don't want to listen anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Certain people, as soon as they realize your ideology, they'll just shut off altogether, right? And they just won't want to hear what you have to say about any issue.
Like I sometimes I use the word soul. You remember that, and that's always like off-putting, right? Because most people, when they associate soul, they think of other religions and other things that have talked about a soul that meant fucking nothing.
Right.
What is a soul in Christianity if not just some kind of prop to say this is why we do things? I mean, cool. We have we too have a prop and say this is why we do things.
Yeah.
But we're saying it originates from the personal quality of the lack. So as the system is neglecting you, there is a sense of wrong. That's personal sense of wrong.
Right.
That is the quality of like that needs saving. That's the metaphor.
Right.
This is where the rescue idea comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, we prop that as negative. It's not a thing. It's just this quality of not something being there. That's soul. Move that into the social sphere, right? That's the zeitgeist, because that's the collective feel of everybody else too. So it's not a nebulous, object out in ether space from mythology that is a soul that needs saving, but it's like a literal recognition in real life, in real experience, and in actual living people of source of need for something. Like it's not defined at this point,
Yep.
but there is a need. Anyway.
And then we do end up going on to show how it came through time, the process of commodification of all life,
Right.
through various plateaus of civilization, starting
Builds
with
it
the
up,
walled
yeah.
city.
Yeah.
What went on in the mind to allow you to like just give up all your your defense is to trust that the wall is going to save you or whatever. Like you
Right.
externalize that, but you keep externalizing everything, and literally all you need to do is make money.
Yeah.
What's missing? You can't do jack shit. You're like
You're control, right?
You
giving
built
everything up.
you built this entire wall around your entire city only to be completely distrustful of your next door neighbor
Right.
and lock the door.
Well, back then it was more of an immediate threat, right? Physical violence. There's kingdoms getting taken.
Property was the only thing that kicked this off, and the first time property came into the scene was during the initial stages of the agricultural revolution, because up until that point you just had to move with the environment,
Right, yeah.
because like in one season food is here and the next season food is not here anymore,
Right.
it's over there.
People were more
And
nomadic. Yeah.
people, they weren't really nomadic, they had patterns of migrations that they would repeat, like buffalo would
Right.
or whatever, so
Mhm.
so we're just
I thought that's
we were-
nomadic.
I tend to think of nomadic as like having no basis and like can just like replug yourself,
Yeah.
whereas this has a kind of a tie to the landscape, because they're
Yeah, well, they're going
they're
back
mo-
to the same
they're
spots all the
moving
time.
with it. Yeah, they're like a circulatory system
Right.
inside of it.
Okay.
That's my own personal thing, though.
Yeah.
That's not me trying to redefine words.
There could be a distinction there.
Yeah. So yeah, like
Wow, a moment of silence. So Eon mentioned a
think for a
while
moment.
ago the anxiety being endless because it never resolves, and he said into the concrete,
right.
which
Because no transaction can stop the flow of transactions unless it's about not transactions anymore.
Right.
So that's fair.
negative feedback loop.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention, when I said soul, it was this nebulous thing, but really, if you have ego on the one side of the spectrum, the more ego you have, the stronger is the case for the neglect of the soul, if you will, and the quality that comes along with it of a need of a rescue. So the stronger the ego, the harder it is to fall, if you will, in terms of or the harder the intensity it is of this quality. Now that's a pretty what do you call it, tall claim, but the way I'm seeing it is basically the more pronounced this ego is, the more masking of the neglect it is involved in. So what it looks like is more and more and more distracting busy work, and further entrenchment into the cycles of the system itself rather than any other cycle at all. So the workaholic, it's a mad fucking space to be in, basically. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was the idea.
The mad space. So anxiety, never resolving. Jan was saying in the context of like taxes, and being chased in a dream but never caught, and
Yeah.
never getting away. And
It's-
that's why I think I was wondering what he meant by resolved into the concrete.
It just
Like taxes, I guess, as an abstract thing, as an abstraction, it never is really in front of you. It's always some wispy dream thing.
like
The
that.
government needs to get paid. Okay, you just add that some floaty thing out there
Right.
that keeps you in this loop of anxiety, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's as long as it's unresolved, right? I mean, you can
Well, what I'm
make
s-
your plans to pay your taxes, or I guess if
And it never
the stress
can.
and depression could come from not having
So really,
that money,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and it never resolves because if you're trying to own property or whatever, you
So
have
I'm-
taxes.
Well,
to
it's
pay.
never ending, yes.
So
Right,
here's
honestly,
the,
It'll
here's
be,
the
it'll
never
be coming
ending.
up again next year and the
That's
year
what I was
after,
trying to get
and-
at with my little abstraction there again. The never-ending part is because the more the ego is grown, the more desperate it is to fill the void, the more busy work it's doing, and the more it's building itself up.
Right.
Right? Because it's only dealing with the transactional part of it and not with the actual neglect. And so it's a kind of like a race to the bottom, if you will, or a runaway exponential sort of build up in which each successive action just inflates the next. So each action inflates the neglect. Neglect gives more desperation rather than satiating the ego.
Right.
Ego moves into another transaction to satiate the neglect. That's that doesn't satiate
The
anything.
Band-Aid ball.
It just
The ball of
inflates
Band-Aid.
Right.
It just inflates the ego, and at the same time inflates the desperation, and so on and on and on and on until you go all the way to the end of your life with just nothing but regret,
Right.
if you will.
Well, yeah, and you can get into depression, and I guess you become complacent with.
Most common regrets on deathbeds is I should have spent more time with people and not chasing after things. Like,
Yeah.
usually that's how it's framed.
Yeah, it's not about having regrets about what you did. It's about more what you didn't do. From what I
Or
hear.
more not being with certain people, actually. Not even doing. Doing doesn't come into their rhetoric.
All right. Well, that's what I've heard from a few.
Okay. Well,
It's about what you didn't do, right? Your regrets about
my
not living.
my information is
basically.
more hearsay, but yeah. it's
Well,
possible.
none of us have been on our deathbed. Knock knock. But
Well, I've never been
I
on
mean,
anybody else.
or on the other way, right? Yeah. So, but
But yeah, like
you can't be afraid to live at
Yeah.
the same time, right? That's what I
Yeah.
take from it.
I was only
You know,
trying
you-
to show that. I was only trying to show how, despite the fact that you're using like egos to avoid punishment, kind of a thing, the artificiality of it keeps building in the very neglect that pushes you towards making more and more transactions.
Right.
Right, and so the more you're entrenched in that, the less you are you. The more you are part of the mechanical system that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
That's really the crucial part I want to show. Only to the point that I guess this goes back to like really nailing hard why charlatanism is a real problem, like beyond any like. What I want to say is that we've on one side we've painted charlatanism as this like okayish thing, but on the other hand, it's completely the thing that undermines the very topic we're trying to build in the first place. So while it is not disconnected from what we're doing, it is also part and parcel with what the problem really, really is. Because every time a zeitgeist makes itself more concrete, like we need to do something, a solution is sold by the market again to pacify and then blow off the steam.
Right. As maybe a temporary
Yeah.
band-aid solution, kind of
And
doesn't deal with the root of the problem. It just deals
Exactly.
with whatever.
Mhm.
And as I'm sure you know,
That's how civilization was built.
as I'm sure
Right.
you know, like that's all we're doing.
Right.
Like we're never really solving the core problems. We're
No, yeah,
we're
exactly.
patching this, we're patching that, we're patching this.
Yeah.
New rule, new
Right.
law, new building,
Right.
but never. Well, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah. That like kind of goes back to the whole artificial anxiety that's just being pushed by society and pushed by the media and
Yeah,
this and that, right? Because I think naturally in your body, anxiety and depression is coming about because it's almost like a call to action. Like you recognize like something needs to change, and then you're constantly focused on it.
Yeah.
But you're like, so depression is whenever you become kind of complacent with
Yeah.
your situation, and it's like I can't do anything to get out of this.
So the
I'm stuck
suggestion-
down here. You know,
yeah. So
how
the,
can I-
so the suggestion from our perspective would be like, why don't you focus on this whole neglect with the soul and the zeitgeist and
Right.
and all of these explanations. Understand that this is the only story that's happening, and therefore none of these tugs are really pertinent to anybody. You
Right.
don't need to be fed back through these loops if you just look at what these loops are, and you're like, okay, so another loop is happening.
Right. Yeah, you just
If I
need
don't
to
put
recognize
myself
it.
in it, I'm
Yeah.
not in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the argument. Like if you were to boil it all down
Yeah.
to it, but you got to build up the whole picture before you can actually say that this is the point.
Right. And it comes with experience as well, right? I mean, the more negative experiences you've had, the more trying kind of situations, push
But-
yourself, you elevate yourself above it, conquer it, then the next time something comes up like that, you can deal with it way easier, right?
One would hope, yeah.
Kind of, well, that's the idea of growth too,
Well,
right? I mean,
the idea
that's
of-
what you're shooting for. is-
Exactly. What our whole argument basically, like biology carried us to this point, and
Yeah.
now we're like here
Right.
mentally, even though our mentality can keep doing the same thing that biology was doing before it,
Mhm.
and the whole thing just keeps going the way it used to instead of just blowing up once in a while for no reason.
Right.
And fucking atom bombs at this point.
Well, yeah, it's all
Yep.
trying to. Yeah, I don't want to get into that, but.
Fundament-
talking about like the war in Ukraine as an example,
No, I
Perhaps?
was just
Or
talking
just-
about. I was literally talking about the
Oh, okay.
A-bombs.
right?
That's another example of a completely useless endeavor
Well,
that
yeah.
costs lives.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Oh,
The
yeah,
Russians
100%.
aren't fucking having a picnic there.
No, yeah, exactly.
And the worst part about this, all of them are pretty much like new, fresh conscripts that know fuck all about all the politics.
No, we weren't going to get into it though.
yeah, let's not get into that.
No, I'm getting into the sadness of the fact that like people who have no idea what they're doing are getting blown to bits.
Right. All for this, globalist agenda? Can we say?
Russia is not interested in the global expansion so much as it is very, very, very keen on reclaiming the specific strip of land due to the fact that it's mountainous.
Strategic.
It's very
Yeah.
mountainous, and past that point, like if there's any kind of invasion, it's very much flatlands,
Right.
and so there's very little that.
So that's their motive, but I'm saying they're the
No, I know.
globalist kind of,
But this is a
Putin
mentali-
can't be controlled, so let's have a regime change. Take them out.
This mentality comes
I
from
think that's-
that comes from the Russian Empire.
Right.
It's
a manifest
it's
destiny
another
kind of-
attempt to revive the old world, if you will.
Right, yeah.
Or also pushback from the globalist type of one world order.
Right.
Central
They don't wanna
banking
comply
system.
with-
Oh, you don't want a central bank? That's a bombing,
Mm,
right?
yeah. So,
And the central bank, you control the currency. It doesn't matter who's in power, quote unquote,
Exactly, yeah.
politics. You got the currency, you've got everything.
if you can dictate what the dollar value is.
And who gets loans?
Right, yeah.
Who gets the power of the currency?
Yep.
Coercion at its finest.
Well,
Don't do what
the
I
states
if
is
you
losing
don't
their
do what I
control,
say-
though, because.
But if you don't do what I say, you can't do anything.
Right.
Yeah, so this is all supposed
They
to be...
want to have their puppets
Because
that they
once
can
you're
control,
Because
right?
once you your debit card is in your chip, all they have to do is
No, now you have no money.
not give access to said chip.
Well,
that's it.
okay, so this
That's-
is...
that's
this
what
is,
it's coming to. That's like
this
the-
is simply zeitgeist.
Yeah,
Right here.
Yeah,
All it
this
is
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 this is the
zeitgeist.
full blown abstraction.
So there are charlatans who deal with it. We can look at it as a way of systems of machines which have always been around since the oral tradition got bombed by written word, by externalization of memory.
Ugh.
The medicine machine and the sentience machine have gone dark, and the ego machine has taken over.
So basically, we're in a dumb machine.
Yeah.
Hence the spectrum of stupidity.
Yeah.
No sentience.
Well, and then if you're just getting bombarded on what to think by the media and wherever, wherever you're getting your information, basically.
So our spectrum of stupidity is kind of divided between the objective and the solipsistic, where the objective side is focused on what is real versus what's not real, and the solipsistic side is concentrating on what's moral and what's amoral.
Right.
And the thing about both of these and why they're both in the stupid realm is because they're trying to be formulative. And the problem with formulation is that it's always either contradictory or it's incomplete.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how sophisticated a system you're going to flush out, in your objective sphere or your solipsistic sphere, so long as you believe this is a thing and that is a thing and this plus this equals that, so long as you're using that kind of formulation, you're going to be stuck in a system that either doesn't capture everything,
Right.
or says contradictory things about those things. So you're going to have two different opinions that are both correct. And being stuck without being able to switch context, without being polymorphic, without being switching around how you do things,
Right.
from moment to moment to moment to moment, gets you stuck in this spectrum of trying to navigate these objects that lead you into contradictions, and basically you're stuck in the realm of the stupid.
Right.
Not stupid. Stupid does not mean not clever. Like, you can be very clever and really dumb, and this is exemplified by your typical academic
Like book smart versus
who can do math to incredible feats, but can't for the life of them wipe their ass properly.
or they lack social skills. And
That's what I mean by wiping their ass properly.
Well,
but yeah,
interpersonal
you don't want to be
relationships
around a
or-
person who doesn't wipe their ass properly. You know,
Right, yeah.
kind of smelly.
Well, yeah. And then, well, typically at that point you're on a certain spectrum, right? So now they're
But
starting to
what I'm
recognize it a little more,
But
right?
what
Where
I
it's
was
like,
saying is that there's a spectrum that we're all on, and
Right,
we're
okay.
both subject to it. And you don't have to be just an autistic person. Autistic,
well,
probably.
Asperger's, whatever. You know,
Yeah,
there's
those
different.
those are probably more extreme adaptations
Mhm.
to this objectivity sort of cycles that we subject ourselves to all the time, to the point where we're neurotic about it.
Right.
And now you have an adaptation of you're born neurotically
To-
in these cycles.
You can't help it but obsess over certain things if you're
So
autistic.
I
maybe.
doubt it's the shots that created this increase of the problem. I just think that we're moving into an adaptive phase that is very maladaptive.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
Just being subjected to the world.
Never know.
Yeah.
They're more. Well, think about it, and there's some non-zero probability I'm fall into the spectrum myself. It's basically just like all it did, like from my experiences, if it was to be the case, all it did is remove all the human elements that would normally come naturally to me, and made me feel like an outcast for a long time, just because I could not relate. It's like if you're playing music in a certain key, and somebody else playing an instrument in a different key,
Right.
and it sounds like it should be off, but it isn't. Like, that's kind of like that's my emotional. That's how I feel like my emotional responses are.
Right.
In that I feel everything everybody else feels, but not at the same time, or not at the same intensity.
Yeah, maybe you're processing it different. Maybe you just have different expectations of how somebody else's mind is going to work in relation to yours. And then whenever
Like,
they don't meet that
like
expectation,
like a lot of the times when we conversed in social settings, a lot of people would be like, "Calm down, guys," and we're fucking having a blast,
right?
right? And it's like, calm down from what?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, you can get it
that's how
excited
it
about
comes
certain
out. It's
things.
just like these weird, like, sort of connections, but they're not. Like, that's just the other thing of it. Like, I've never felt like I'm not a person either. So it's
Right.
Again, speculation. If I were to be, like, what that would be is an adaptation towards what we're doing to ourselves mentally, and I've kind of like came pre-prepared to be a human calculator
Right.
before I am a human.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's how I put it. So
Yeah,
Fuck-
I mean, there's
fuck
different
all this
intelligences, right? So, you can be more emotionally intelligent. You can be more to do with like things and numbers and
I had to create a model for my emotional intelligence, though. Like, I had to think it through before I could feel it through.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with that maybe ego machine or the hijacking machine, whatever you guys are talking about, you start getting into this depression, and then you start to feel more disconnected from society, and you start to feel like
I definitely
nobody
went through a
knows,
bout of that,
you know.
yeah. I used to wake up and my first thought on my head was, fuck, I'm awake.
Right, another day
I don't
you
wanna
gotta
be
deal with
here.
this shit, right?
Yeah, that was very real for me.
Right, and I think recognizing these pitfalls and stopping that thought process before it even starts is the key, basically. And then it comes with more experience,
My
right?
environment
Like
had to change too.
and yeah, you need to make changes, and you just need to recognize.
5
right?
jobs later, it's finally working out.
Yeah, and I mean, life's not easy. It's just what you make of it. I mean, everybody goes through struggles. Some
And
at different
and
degrees.
Then you have the
some,
MAGA
you know.
guys, man. Then you have the MAGA people.
Well, I don't like to use that term, the MAGA people, because
I'm just being a dick.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think how much they find a way to connect every story to them, and they still won't let them fucking die in the media. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that's
The
like,
T
what does
word.
that say? You know, how they have to connect every negative story. Oh, this is Trump's fault. Meanwhile, he's been out of the picture for how long now, right?
That's happening
Has
across the
no-
board. If you go to this is something I torture myself with. I go to like very different groups on Reddit and just
Sure.
read all the bullshit they say.
Yeah,
And what you
wanna
find
hear
is
what
that
everybody has to say.
And if you find is like on the same issues, you will have it's feminism, it's Trump, and it doesn't matter
Right.
what the issue is, it's X.
Right. We
It's-
can blame everything on.
So and it always goes one of two ways. You
Yeah.
have if you make a label of the problem, you have two camps. Yes, that's the problem. Or second is like, you bunch of assholes, you created another fucking target for yourselves to just bitch about something.
Right.
Leave the shit alone.
It's about a scapegoat and never really taking any responsibility. It's just
And you, every
easier to blame,
every
right?
time, racism.
yeah.
Perfect example of immediate two camps formed. Yes, racism is the worst
Oh,
problem
God.
ever.
Yeah.
I'm not making a comment about racism myself here.
Right, yeah.
I'm just pointing out that there's these two camps. And the second camp is, racism doesn't exist, you're making this shit up, stop fucking trying to create yet another fucking thing
Right. Yeah.
to rail against.
Yeah. Because if everything's racist, then nothing's racist.
Me too.
So
Me Too.
there's a line to be drawn.
The Me Too
Right.
movement.
Okay.
Same, BLM, Me Too. Same fucking thing happened. You have the one camp that's saying, completely, let's get all these bastards out of the fucking whatever, out
Isn't
of
that
our,
just
out of our
divide and
system.
conquer?
And the other one's like, oh, you created yourselves another fucking witch hunt and blah 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 blah. And,
Right, yeah.
and
if
it
your
doesn't matter
view,
who's right anymore.
If your view is one of a pair of polar opposites, and you take that view,
It's dead or
it's probably divide and conquer.
it's
Right.
Right? There's no nuance. Nothing is being sensed.
Well, that's what they don't
Just-
want is moderate thinkers that can.
You said
know,
that soundbite.
this
That
is why
means
we're going to
you
be
are
entertainment.
you are part of that category. You're a Trump supporter, whatever. You're
Right.
this or that. It's
And
just
yeah.
As soon as you say there is a difference between men and women, it doesn't matter which difference.
Just stating that fact,
Over.
you're gonna get. Yeah.
And being a man, stating that
and a white
there might be a
man
difference.
added to it, a whole nother level, right?
There's layering, and it could very well all be true,
Right.
Because this happens more than we care to want,
Yep.
and all of that is true too. But at the same time, does that have anything to do with this person right here sitting in front of you talking about these things,
Right.
or is it all these far-fledged categories into which we're taken mechanically and decimating our actual mentality into different parts of a machine that doesn't work together?
You get swept up into a political,
Right.
as a political agent.
And we're the
Yeah,
only,
and then your political identity
and we're
That's
the
it.
only common
becomes
denominator.
paramount to anything
That's
the
the
only
lens you see everything through. Are you on my side or are you on their side?
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
everything
yeah.
is a black versus white.
But what's the common
Right.
denominator to both sides? They both gotta
Stupidity.
buy the guns from the gun company to fight each other. That's why it's
Well, they want to
worthwhile.
take all the guns away, right? So people are defenseless. By they, I say
I'm
the
not-
Dems.
I'm not.
Like,
I'm
that's
not,
a fair
I'm not
kind of-
referring to these things. I'm referring to the fact that war is actively fueled. It's not something that is
Right.
on the surface. Everybody's against war.
Right.
Special interests, on the other hand, make war inevitable.
Sure. Well, it's a good way to stimulate the economy, for one.
How many times has that been
Stimulate what part of the economy? The war sector? Oh, okay,
Mhm.
great. Yeah, we're
Basically, yeah.
stimulating the economy, sure.
But
Right.
what is the economy for? At least, what are we told the economy is for?
Right.
Us. The economy is supposed to serve us. So, wait a minute. You die for something that is supposed to serve us, and the only thing it serves is the fuel for its own recreation through killing you.
Yeah.
What?
It's just a never-ending cycle.
That's a good economy.
Yeah.
So, again.
At least that's supported.
There you
Right?
go. But
But you say that explicitly, and people look at you like you're a fucking maniac.
right.
Meanwhile, war, like over what?
It's never-ending.
Over fucking what?
Peace
Afga-
sells, but who's buying?
Afghanistan. We're in Afghanistan. We're in Iraq. We're like in fucking.
Oh yeah.
The whole Ukraine thing is oil. And there's nothing to it.
It's another way for them to launder
2000
money
and
too, right?
2000.
That's probably the biggest.
You know the Chimeria, or how is it pronounced?
Crimea.
Crimea. So.
Crimea, yeah.
So, why was it annexed as the first step in this whole ordeal? In 2000,
Back in 2014,
They've got
Yeah.
like amazing
2000
growing.
when the states
climates there.
orchestrated a coup over Ukraine and
No,
the,
no, no.
the Nazis took
it's
over.
very, 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 very clear. In 2012, huge deposits of oil and gas, gas specifically, were discovered in that region,
Oh, okay.
in that sea, right by that area.
Makes sense.
That was going to undercut the entire outpour of Russian gas to the rest of
Right,
Europe.
because then they could supply. Right, and they wouldn't be reliant at the same time.
So
Yeah.
first move
So why-
was make sure they can never develop that area.
Right. So they didn't want them to become energy independent. and-
But also the move from
Have
the other
trade, right?
side was let's take over the government of this country so that we can F with those efforts and try
Well,
to keep
There
it.
is a third
yeah,
party.
and their pipelines were going through
Third party to
as
it.
well.
There is the
so
actual
the Russian
population.
pipelines.
There's also the actual population of Ukraine who insisted on a change as well.
What
but-
the entire population uniformly wanted.
They really did not sit well on the official elector. Protested it the fuck out of it to make sure that he's removed.
Well, you can.
And
that's can all be stage show too.
Yeah, it's
It's
all
hard, you
state-run
never know.
media
Yeah,
as well.
it
so
can
you
be,
can't
but it
really,
flows really well with the whole pipeline situation because the entire move centered around Russia had pipes go through Ukraine to the rest of Europe, and the latter part of the situation was that they put a huge tariff on it.
Right.
And with the discovery of the new oil fields, they could completely tell them to fuck off. We'll
Yeah.
pipe it through the same system, and Bob's your uncle.
Right. Cut
Basic-
the Russians right out.
So, on top of this, we're talking about a generation that is twice removed from the original USSR, like myself. Like, I remember it. I don't remember it.
Right.
Right, like
No, you're
it
too
benefited my mother in the social programs because she was in the right place at the right
Igor
time.
loves fucking
I know.
communism.
Oh my god.
He preaches about it so much.
Between him, my uncle, like me and my cousin, we're basically either having a field day or we're just like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Like, there's more to the story than you're being told, obviously, and their only response is that we're being fed the other side only. Like, I'm not
Wow.
even looking at the news.
Controlled
not.
minds trying to control minds.
Yeah,
What's what that is?
Like, my information isn't coming from the news.
It's the same ego machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they didn't have alternative media, whatever. It's all state-run propaganda, right? Fucking, there wasn't like this freedom of speech
Age
kind of.
does a funny thing to a person in that they stay in the same lane. Like like, I'd never even imagined this happening to my dad, but it's like, I've never seen him do this before, but he's now straddling a single lane out of nowhere.
Right.
And it's got to do a ton of it has to do with just nostalgia about shit that he remembers a certain way.
But when you're a kid going through it, opposed to an adult, it's
but the bigger picture too, right? Like the bigger picture, like we now have information on it, and he doesn't seem to be aware of it.
Not only that,
right.
but the narratives in the media are vilifying and demonizing things that he has taken to his identity in the past, right? So what does that do? But you double down. And you say,
yeah,
well,
usually
great,
that's
actually, I'm going to
that.
defend myself because I'm being attacked in the media and everything. All of a sudden, I'm a Russian. You know, like, what the fuck do
you can't make assumptions about people based off of...
Yeah, it's the same idea. You paint a target and you'll have immediately people saying, yeah, that's the biggest problem, Russia. Meanwhile, it's so much more convoluted than that. And people from the other side are like, stop making another new thing for us to deal with.
But how long have people been brainwashed with that ideology? Since the fucking World War II,
the Reds,
70s, I guess,
But you switch sides.
I mean,
it's like how many times? But this is where the whataboutism comes into play. Like, you switch sides for a second, and you're like, what the fuck is the U.S.
McCarthyism,
doing?
Right? Yeah.
Like the anti-Russian, all that.
Look, what is the U.S. doing? What did Britain do? Like, for centuries? What did fucking the rest of Europe do, except bastardize Africa and India and all of these places
to the
point of like right now they're dysfunctional because of the exploits in the past.
I mean, you can look at this as like the elites, quote unquote, trying their hardest to keep themselves at afloat at the highest point, and exploiting the shit out of everything, playing both sides of war, just continually fueling war, keeping everybody off balance.
Yeah, if you're supplying both sides with the guns and fucking artillery, like...
Right, so you could say there's probably, there's a minority definitely who is actually empowered to really exploit this ego machine, and they fucking do it.
And not only are they empowered, they are sitting at the top of the exponential part of the side of the rise,
so billionaires.
where small movements of theirs turn into like extraordinary reverberations throughout the entire world. Musk and
they're just clawing
all of these people
in desperation to not get clawed themselves and shoved to the bottom.
And they're at least aware of their predicament, in that if they ever stop being the mouthpieces of this ongoing system, like the entire wealth that they are representing is just going to be moved to the next mouthpiece.
Yeah.
So it's not even an identity. It's just a role you play, and at the top, it's the most vacant role of any humanity. In that, it's not you, it's somebody else. I mean, we think of it as something that happens to us at the bottom, if you will. I'm a replaceable employee. But most human relations are actually at the bottom, so it's kind of ironic that way.
Right. Yeah.
It's more sad than anything else that success is measured by such failure.
Well, the system pushes down typically, right?
Yeah, we have a chart for that. So the way we have it framed is that ego is kind of like a ubiquitous thing. Like, there's no difference. There's not my ego versus your ego. It's just the fact that we're trying to climb over each other in this competition world that we have. The system is kind of coming in from the sides, giving us rewards and punishments. That acts like a dashboard of buttons that you press for rewards. If you press the wrong button, you get a punishment. Right. And if you do the right combination, you'll climb over the poor chap that whose ego you've
crushed underneath you. Now, the entire process is a scramble to the top, right? To achieve your potential, so to speak. That's the mythology we're fed. And the more we're climbing to the top, the more we commodify. By commodify means substitute reality for the platitudes of it. So it's like stopping brushing your own teeth and paying somebody else to do it for you, to the point where you just forgot how to do it yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Like over and over
Become
and
too
over.
reliant.
And overall, like, it seems like you're doing good, right? But the whole structure is actually the more people climb, the faster it reaches the ground due to the garbage it's outputting. Like more garbage, more collapse underneath it. So really the game becomes avoid the bottom at all costs, because this is where shit hits the fan.
Right.
And just keep scrambling at the expense of others to the top. And that's the image we were trying to portray with that small picture, but it's also very reminiscent of a biblical picture, the Tower of Babel. The idea to reach God to the point of where it collapses under its own weight.
Right. That makes sense.
It's a metaphor, obviously. It's not.
Sure.
It's not meant to look. I don't know if you noticed. I'm not very biblically inclined personally.
Fair enough.
Like, I respect it to the extent it needs to be respected, and with my view of Christianity, I can put together. But I prefer this image to that.
Yeah.
This means more to me, you know.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of these religious systems are all based on natural systems and your polymorphic systems, like you were talking about, right?
Well, in the Bible, that story is actually
Ideally-
lifted from somewhere else, in which was an actual myth to talk about the warning of reaching too high. It's like the
Right.
flying too close to the
to
sun and all of that
Icarus
stuff.
and
Yeah, exactly. Those are all, but in their own, they told stories that made sense to like, you know, like the child mind, and,
More relatable.
and like,
Yeah.
you know, like, if you overstep your boundaries, you expect to like have a harder fall,
yeah,
right? So things that you would normally take as a life lesson
yeah,
individually, not about like some grand tower out there, but in the Bible was like a amalgamation of these stories done like thousands of years after the fact. It only really reaches back to 400 BC.
right.
Like, Judaism will have you think that it's existed for thousands and thousands of years. That's not true. There's no archaeological evidence that there was a significantly different Judea in the same area that was different than anybody else.
Yeah.
They all worship the same pantheons, and in the Bible, that pantheon became the different names for God.
Right.
So, and all of that happens in the Babylonian captivity, when a certain small section of the population was enslaved
Right. Yeah.
for 80 years.
The Egyptians.
Babylonians.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
The Egyptian captivity, there's zero archaeological evidence for it. It's my understanding, personal, not scholar related, is that during that Babylonian captivity, the Egyptian myth was created to say, we've escaped enslavement before, we are set to do this again. Like that, because
As a template.
because its origin doesn't actually, you can't find it before that time period.
Right.
Like the text, there's no texts about it.
When
And
I
there's
always
definitely-
thought that's how it kind of started, right? Like it was.
Yeah, so the Egyptian is
Moses
is an
and-
actual myth that was invented after the fact, but the main premise of Judaism as a unified identity formulated in those 80 years of captivity, of to say, okay, we're not the Babylonians, and this is what makes us different, and
Right.
over 80 years we have this collection of mythology that to say what the difference is as a means of, you know, population control.
I thought it was created whenever Moses found the tablets.
No, Judaism is a completely, what do you call it, an administrative adventure. It was literally middle management creating something out
So
of
what was the
bits and
rules?
pieces.
What were the rules established to push it onward initially? Then
Um,
what made it different?
so
than,
the exodus out of Babylon created a community of these individuals
Right.
that later on became Judaism.
So they didn't want to
But
believe
there's only-
a certain thing from.
Yeah, so there's only a 400-year period between the inception of Judaism and Christianity, for example.
Right.
It's actually really close together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Before the 400 years, the Canaanites used to be just like a hodgepodge sort of. It's the same race of people that became the Greeks, Phoenicians.
Okay.
The Phoenicians are the creators of the first alphabet. Actually, they're the
Right,
one-
yeah.
So they're the ones that have Aleph Bet in Hebrew and Alpha Beta in Greek, for example.
Right.
And
So
before
where was that? Probably in Iraq, kind of around
no
that area?
Canaan is Israel, Jordan, I think parts of the Saudi Arabia Peninsula. I don't know
Okay.
exactly, but it's literally that one smaller because
Or
Egypt because
Iran, maybe?
well, no that's
Is
further
that, isn't that, I
it's
thought
further
that's where
up.
language was basically created.
That,
was
those
Iran
that's
and,
Mesopotamia.
Okay.
That's Mesopotamia. It's a bit higher up.
Right.
So the reason Canaan was a region of any significance at all is because the Phoenicians were seafarers, so they used the Mediterranean a lot,
Okay.
and this was their land-based, so to speak, other part of their culture, same culture, and it was a channel between Egypt and Mesopotamia at the same time, so they were in the middle of trade,
Oh, okay.
so they could kind of create themselves out of nothing in the desert.
Right. So they
Um,
developed their own society.
Yeah, so part of Judaism is very Egyptian for that reason, because of that. So, like the idea of a singular God that is responsible for fate and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm. Yeah, because the Egyptians were, they
But the
believed
Cana-
in different gods, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, but so the Canaanites. And the Canaanite pantheon is really what you hear the names of gods are. El, Shaddai, all of these different weird names that you hear, Baal.
Right.
All of these biblical references to the God that is in different names are actually found to be different, brothers, sisters of the pantheon and the Canaanites.
So they were still all monotheistic, though, right? So it was basically one
No.
god.
No,
No.
no.
So
The,
they
the
believed in-
monotheism is just like that little tidbit out of Babylon. That's
But I
like,
thought
we're
that's
now
where like
doing-
the Jews kind of like almost came up with that, right? Like, I figured they were one of the first
So-
ones to believe in a single god.
So that was the what do you call it? The end result of the Babylonian captivity. So they took Canaanites that were polytheistic. 80 years were spent in captivity. During that time, their own internal middle management transformed mythology into a specific record
Right.
to give an identity to these captives, to give them the hope of Exodus
Right.
through the story of Exodus, and eventually, once once past generations passed, they had no further basis
Right.
for the past, and so they only had the new information. Once they returned, it kind of started evolving into what we call Judaism.
But it wasn't it like Abraham having the call to action.
All pagans. Look, all of these stories are taken from different other paganistic myths
Right.
that were specific to specific to the stories that we're talking about.
Right.
So it might. I
So you're
don't
saying
know-
there's no truth based on.
It's
or
not that there's no
real
truth. It's just the
way to prove anything.
The way we correlate the biblical stories now are not where they come from at all.
Right.
Like the story of the flood, many civilizations experienced the flood. Who knows which ones they picked and combined together
Right.
to put into, because part of it is kind of Egyptian in sounding, another part of it is sounding because there was a flood. There was a flood in the Tigris and Euphrates area, the Iran-Iraq part. All of that matches,
Yeah.
right, due to weather and stuff and archaeology.
Mhm.
But the story itself is a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
You know, like it's kind
They
of
took
like just to
two
make
of each animal and like the logistics of that. There's no fucking way. Of course, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah, so were there by that point, is it possible to have there been barges in a flood time where they would kind of take in their farm animals in and ride it out?
Right.
Yeah.
It's believable. Sure. But on the scale that they're trying to portray in the book.
So yeah, it's like it's taking that story
Yeah.
and being like, okay, cool, like let's embellish it a little bit.
Right, yeah.
Who's gonna prove us wrong?
Well, and yeah, a lot of it's symbolism, I guess, too.
Mythology
Right.
is always like that. When you project up to the perfection, to the archetype, you're taking small scale stories and trying to make meaning out of it in a way that can be told as a story.
On a
So
bigger scale, yeah.
You make everyone the hero and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff,
And-
and gods and all that.
In the case of the Bible, the story really was to elevate the status of the Israelites against the world,
Right.
because they were basically in the enslavement camp
Yeah.
in the world
Right.
at the time. So how do you reconcile your existence and be proud of yourself?
Right. So to overcome that, being a slave in your mind, and then become your
Yeah.
own kind of individual.
So the answer was Israel. I don't know if you've read the Bible, but it says it a few times, is that Israel is supposed to be like take the role of the priest for the rest of the world as a guide towards God. So Israel as a nation is supposed to be the priest in the world. That's the final, so to speak, stance. So it's not even concerned with conversion, like Christianity would be. It's not trying to save your soul.
right.
It's basically saying, no, this is how it is. This is how we are.
Yeah. But
That's-
they don't
that's the-
necessarily believe in life after death either.
Yeah, that's a different story. Yeah,
So-
because Christianity developed after the fact, right, into something very different,
Right.
with the Greeks specifically.
Yeah, a lot of Roman influence, I guess.
Hades. The first time you hear references to hell is with the word Hades.
Right.
So
Okay, and
well, that should
that's-
tell you something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there's just so many similarities between all these different mythological stories, right? And like morals, like
Yeah.
things to be gained from them, basically, right?
At that same time area, you had Zoroastrianism, I think it's called. I forget the pronunciation.
Yeah, Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, and what it was different than the rest of them is that it did hold the singularity for God that the other systems did not.
Right.
So even if they had a king of gods in their pantheons, they would still have many different subordinates, right,
Right.
in the pantheon. In this case, it was just A, not A, and that's it.
Right.
And so and it is I don't know the truth of this, but that as being one of the influences as one has been suggested many times.
Yeah, because with like Christianity, say, you've got your representatives next to God. You know, your priests, your kings.
Which
royalty,
which funny
basically,
enough-
which is not necessarily
Which funny enough, what Jesus would call the Pharisees.
false prophets.
Well, no, the rule makers. The whole story, the whole gospel story is this guy didn't obey the rules.
Right.
He broke the rules every time. Every expectation that they've had for the most religious person ever
Right.
was completely like counter positional to everything they've done so far. So the story goes they kill
Right.
him for it, right?
Right.
But yeah, like that's the thing. That's the irony of it, is that you got this entire church system
Right.
forming after the fact to repeat the cycle.
But if they demonized him as the false prophet, they can justify doing whatever to him because he's going contrary to their religious beliefs.
Well, they kind of do.
Right? That's basically what happened.
They kind of do by appropriating the specific image for who the true prophet is.
Right.
They can stand there and argue until they're blue in the face. Oh yeah, but this is the false prophet. Like this is not what Jesus really did. Right?
Well, how can you claim to be the son of
Strawman.
God?
It's
Right?
it's a
That's-
strawman argument.
It's a crazy claim to make that you're the son of God, right? I don't think anybody would, unless you're a true believer, how can you allow that?
You know, in my head, I can, because if I look at it from the if I'm looking at it from the perspective of the son being like the gentle push before the event, whereas the father is the wrath after the event, the consequence,
Mm-hmm.
then the idea of Christ-like makes a lot of sense to me. Christian means Christ-like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take the role of Christ in the moment.
Right.
In that moment,
Selfless.
that is
Kind of.
the Son of God, given that graceful nudge.
Right.
You don't have to like identify like as the Son of God, right? Like we just
Right.
like to understand this relationship between the before and the after. You can see grace in the before and the wrath in the after.
Right.
It's again, it's all metaphorical, obviously.
So I guess you just have ideals to compare to and strive for, basically, right? It's like, you know, you'll never
yeah.
reach.
Funny enough, this avoids the whole plethora of judging other people as Christ-like or not Christ-like, because it has nothing to do with that. It's just your nudges and your consequences
Right.
over and over. And sure, you might converse about nudges and consequences in the abstract with another person and nudge them that way.
Yeah.
Do you have to coerce at that point? Where's the grace in that?
Well, there's
Christians-
another diversion where you think about like karma. And,
Christians
you know,
love
kind of like
you know what Christians
what
love
goes
to
around
do?
comes around.
And this is my experiences with the church, and yes, I'm acknowledging what you're saying. I'm just
Yeah.
wired.
Yeah. Sorry for getting off topic again.
No worries, no
but-
worries. We'll come right back.
It's all topic.
What I mean is that the ironic outcome of all of this is that you have passages in the Bible saying things like, if a brother's having a problem,
Help them out.
take him to the side, talk to them, and then maybe bring him to the church to figure it all out. None of this is about coercion, but it's all made about coercion in any modern rhetoric,
Right.
because it's about like telling people what to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Anyway.
So the irony is in the fucking lack of grace there. Do it my
Right.
way or you're wrong. It's not the gentle push that says the wrath is coming,
Yeah.
right? Which is self-consequential, which you can talk about without a judgment.
Yeah.
Judge not unless you be judged yourself. Like all of this fits with that, not with what they're doing.
Right.
It's fucking. I don't actually know if I have a point there, but I felt like saying it all.
Well, we're basically just talking about how religion is used to almost direct society and
Charlatanism.
mind
yeah.
states and,
Well, this
ways
is
of thinking, right? Mind control, in a way.
this is a charlatanism. The religion becomes a trinket to sell you to self-help, so that you shut up about the problem of neglect
Right.
and just buy your cross, put your hands together, and say a few words. And
Sure. It's a way to control, yeah. Gives people excuses to do really horrible things, too.
and speaking
Right?
of
I think that's
karma,
used as a tool for war.
again, speaking of karma, and this is going to make it sad again. Karma is a theory in that your intentions actually matter. So it's a little bit more abstract than I'd like it to be, so that it's easy to understand. But the point being is that if I come at you with ill intent,
Right.
ill things are going to be a result. If I come at you with good intentions,
Right, yeah.
in general, like, so this is in general, like we're not talking about outlying cases where the person is got a problem with you or something like that.
Right.
Just in general. So karma is merely a statement to the effect of the intentions of what you do will permeate throughout the outcome of what you've done.
Right.
So it may not come to you today. It could come to you tomorrow. It could come to you. It could come to your children. It could come to you. It could come to your society.
Right.
Where it lands is not the point. There's no identification with any of that. It's just the fact that with this move, that happens. With this move, this happens.
Yeah.
It's all like it almost sounds like it should be straightforward, right?
It's, yeah. Well, so it can be assumed that if you put out negative, you're going to receive negative. Not necessarily if you can put out positive, you're going to receive positive.
And it's not even
Right?
you.
You can't.
If I
Just
come
because
at,
one's true doesn't
if I
make the
come
other
at-
one true.
If I
really,
come at
right?
you negatively and start yelling at you, I've already created negativity inside you
Yeah.
by yelling at you, right?
Yeah.
Like that's you don't even have to have it come back to you. It's already done. And
It's
then
already
that-
out there, yeah.
so it can stand to follow that negativity I created and you can reverberate right back onto me.
Yeah.
Given the choice, it could be again. It could be today, but it could be tomorrow. You could, you could.
It's
stew,
coming back to you
could
eventually.
stew on it. You could have talked to your friends, and you could have let it go, but they haven't.
Right.
Like lots of different ways this thing can transmutate
Yep.
through conversation and ongoings.
Totally.
So the sad part is that karma and this Christ-like behavior of nudging and wrath and all that is it's the same damn thing.
Right. Yeah.
And we can either look at it more mechanically like karma, or like personally like there's somebody watching out for you. The net result is really the same thing, but the sad part is that everybody's missing the fucking point.
Right.
If you look at karma transactionally, anything
Ego machine,
transactional,
market
you're
machine.
back into
Right. You can't fuel it
so
necessarily.
So with karma,
like expecting something good to come back. That's why I was
That's
saying
ego machine
negative.
again.
Negative gets negative no matter what. Positive doesn't always get positive, right? Overall, maybe.
Yeah.
But
like I mean, this is why you can survive being an asshole for a long time. But
Right.
For example, Hitler did this, and Hitler is slowly moving from a place of, Führer, an
Right.
admired person in his life to some extent, to a more of a mythological evil kind of
representation.
yeah
of that,
of symbolic evil,
Right.
Like so the karma didn't affect him necessarily personally till the very end,
Right.
but there's more karma than that, and how it's affected everything else outside of that.
Well, he was an authoritarian, so it's there's no bending.
There's
in it,
that.
right? The ego drives that huge.
Authority is more like an emergent property of whoever is here.
Right.
It's a kind of like a fake stack because it doesn't go anywhere. That's its main. That's the main argument about. Because from the other perspective, like we're talking about nature stacking up into more complex stuff.
Yeah.
This complexity is like a cancer complexity. It gets bigger, but it's not going anywhere.
Right.
Or it's not growing into anything else. It's stuck. It's
Yeah.
stuck in the same shape. It's goo.
Right.
I think it's okay that we're derailed as far as we have been because we didn't expect company. So
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry
just-
to get you guys
No,
off
that's-
topic
okay.
again.
No, you're not getting
Hopefully
me off topic. I just
didn't
wanted
dumb
to.
down the conversation too
No,
much.
no.
For the average folk.
Well, it's always better to
It's a
have.
change of pace.
It's
Yeah.
always better to have a,
It's a change of pace for us.
conversation than just to drone on without input from
Yeah.
somebody else.
Right.
Because
Yeah, between
Some
me
things
and
are
him,
wherever
games.
wherever that goes
Like-
is fine.
but
Yeah.
see, between me and him, I can talk until I'm blue in the face, and he'll get it. Like he'll get like the vast majority of everything I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because I've said it so many times in different ways.
Right.
But it doesn't tell me if like I were to speak to a new person, is what we're talking about is still making sense, or are we off into our own little world?
Right. Well, when you guys have
And we are
maybe more established thought processes around certain things and
Yeah.
have worked things out, and maybe I've worked things out differently. So
No, it's cool.
course,
Like the fact that we can actually use the same language and kind of have a proper conversation. Like I don't know how much of it is, retained or to which the degree is the details are making sense.
right.
I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm talking to you and you're just like looking at me like, what?
Yeah.
Look at what's going on here.
Certain people are
that's a
more
good thing.
receptive though to these kind of conversations. Not saying I'm like overly receptive to it, but I mean I've tried to keep an open mind and I'm pretty introspective with recognizing how
Well, I
I
didn't-
feel and
I didn't
processes.
hear a lot of I don't think it works that way, and that would have been fine, But because I'm not hearing it, like it tells me that I'm at least making some sense.
Well, about the child rearing and whatever, I don't think that was. I kind of disagree with that a little bit.
That's something.
I mean, I can agree with it to a certain extent, but I don't think it was like all hands off, just let the kids run around. I don't think that's the case. There's no fucking way.
It's not all hands off. There's some degree of responsibility. I don't know what it is, and I think it's different in different places. It is the kind of thing that I never even thought of until I saw it for myself. Like, to be honest with you, I never even considered it. Like that
you saw it for yourself, though.
Yeah, like there was the Inuit is actually still a really good source for this, because they have right now, like by world standards, the least coercive approach to child rearing, and it's fascinating to watch. Like one of the stories that a good friend of ours, Vicky, on our channel, she shared about that, and in the story, this is very rough because my memory's not that good, but it was like a 2-year-old kid with his mother near a riverbank kind of thing where they have like lots of stones, and she would encourage the kid to throw the stones at her. Right? Sounds weird. And then she would react, being like, ow, that hurt. Right? So she was basically allowing the kid to do the activity that normally would get them spanked or whatever in our... She was doing it deliberately. And what was happening is that the 2-year-old started to understand that, oh, yeah, I can do that.
Right.
But now I kind of don't want to do that.
You don't want to hurt your mom.
And so, to skip a few steps, because I don't know them well enough to articulate anything about them, in their society, just a general display of anger over anything is treated as if like you're still 2.
Right.
So
yes, because you're not evolved enough to be able to process it in a
exactly so
acceptable way.
And they were talking about situations in which they would like spend hours weaving this a thread to do the hunt for the seal.
Yeah.
And they were doing the hunt, and the fucking thing, it took them hours to build it, broke.
Right.
And the only response you see from them is like, oh, let's fix it up.
Back to the drawing board.
Let's fix it up.
Yeah.
Like no response. Like, imagine people this collected in any other setting.
Yeah.
They don't exist in our society.
Well, because their ego machine isn't hijacking the situation, right? That picture is like what I'm trying to really paint here. It's like this lack of coercion thing. Yeah.
This lack of coercion thing translates into a lack of needing to coerce the earth towards your ends. You're not disappointed with what happens. You're not angry at events. You're
right.
And you learn that from the beginning, the very beginning.
Right.
That you can do whatever you want, but you shouldn't. The other thing that really fascinates me about that culture specifically, which I am probably naively assuming about many other cultures, is that their storytelling are what their mythology and storytelling is for. In our society, we would be like, don't step on the thin ice, you'll fall through.
Right.
What does the kid do?
Wants
Goes
to test it.
fucking in the ice, yeah. Their stories are like, underneath the ice, a monster exists that takes children and takes them away.
Right.
They don't test that.
Right. Okay.
And when they grow up, it's not that they stop disbelieving the stories, but they gain a sense of, these are stories.
Yeah.
And so if you end up being, again, like taking shit too seriously, they're gonna look at you like you're fucking 12.
Right.
And not, like, what are you? You don't know that this is a story?
Yeah.
So it is real, but it's not real.
But you have to realize
the
the consequences are absolute, though, at the same time.
Well, this is the part where they know it's just a story.
It's been mythologized from a number of smaller stories in which people actually died.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the only reason
expand that out into something more
and the
protective,
stories that
archetypal.
survive, the process are the useful ones.
Right, because they worked.
Exactly. So you eliminate the stories that are garbage
Yeah.
in the process, which is why you don't get the same stories from different tribes. You get different stories from different tribes because they
Right.
evolve differently.
Yeah, and a lot of it's like your senses and things like that, how your body's evolved, right?
Well,
Different people, different races.
you could
this
almost
and
say
that.
like each person would hold their own version of the myth,
Right.
and whoever happens to be telling that story, that's the story that's being told, rather than there being a book that says this is the story.
Right.
Yeah. You were talking about Ryan was talking about like how writing eliminates the oral tradition, and there's a great example of that with the Maori people that I heard about. Again, this is just me talking, but what happened was basically is that situation where every tribe kind of held on to their own version of the stories.
Right.
Well, one of the tribes got their version of the story written down
Okay.
at the expense of all the other ones, because now, especially in the Western world, this
Got
is
published,
the Maori history.
got famous.
Right,
This is the Maori mythology.
Right.
Meanwhile, it completely like washes over what other people might have to say about it, or how they grew up, or anything to do
Yeah.
with it. It's just
But then
sad.
how many societies never had a written history? So you'll never know anything about them.
The oral stuff is the killer, though. You kill the oral stuff,
yeah,
you kill
if
the culture.
Society's wiped out. Who's going to be talking about it?
And
Or-
that's the goal, though. That's-
Like whatever they did here with
Well,
these
that's-
residential schools, blah blah blah,
That's-
trying to wipe out the
That's the goal,
indigenous
though.
cultures.
If it's written down, you don't need an authority to speak for a story anymore. That's the story. It's in the book.
Right. And then
It-
history's written by the victors though at the same time. So,
At this point, it's written by fucking algorithms.
well, okay.
So victors don't get spoils here at all. Victors just get swept up in the same cycle.
Okay, well, one way to look at it now is if you have control of the media, you can paint the picture of what reality is in society. Right? If there's no conflicting
Yeah.
ideas
So-
of
So yeah.
what reality is, then
so
you're going to get stuck.
You're hinting at why I just said is actually a problem, because now it's being extreme.
Yeah.
And now if it's extreme, you just rewrite everything and anything to the way you would want it.
Yeah. But who's the authority on the truth? Right? How do we know
Who's
what's
the authority
true
over your
and
truth?
what's propaganda?
But who's the authority over your truth?
Well,
is
over
it
my
a-
own truth.
Is
yes.
it an
I
equation?
am,
Is it an
obviously, but-
equation that somebody else gives to you, or is it a decision you make? You know,
Right.
that's really the question. But if you don't feel like you can make any other different decision than the one you're making, are you making the decision? That's coercion.
Or yeah, but so can you recognize when you're being weaponized and manipulated?
Yeah. Which is the same scenario as being food for the lion, except in that case you should have run away and get the fuck out of there.
Right.
Here you have to submit.
Well, what are your options?
Yeah, very broken.
So
Medicine.
stuff to think about, I guess.
Yeah. I wish I could stop.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you got to realize, like, not to overanalyze certain situations and just be able to shut your brain off and realize certain situations you can control, other situations you have no control over.
I like the idea of moving it back to this is just the story repeating, and therefore you just don't have to like really get swept up by the tangents of the story, but be like, okay, this is another ego transaction with another inflation of the soul and another like this and that and that. And if you bring yourself back to that, there's nothing to attach to.
Right.
Because this has just happened before, it's just going to happen again and again and again, and it's not going to be anything different.
Right.
So there's
Can't
no,
break the cycle.
So there's nothing new to gain from it. You can't buy your way out of that kind of shit,
Right.
or buy it, or avoid it, or whatever. It's just what it is. But with that, it doesn't become as bad as it is because it's no longer the driver.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right.
You can make the choice aside from the consequences effectively, like whether it's going to feel good or bad in the future, you can make a choice that doesn't have to do with that transaction. You can step back from the transaction world and do something that may be more holistic and healing, that maybe...
Because it just is in the...
Even
that
though
is what's
pain-
required to do.
Even though
Yeah.
pain is threatened.
Yeah, figure out a way to kind of lessen the blow.
Yeah, and we're not advocates for the doormat mentality either. Like, I know...
Like victim, yeah.
It's... No, doormat. Doormat is just like letting the world like walk all over you because you don't respond to anything. So the idea isn't to like place oneself under that. So it's not like to go right up against the system, but it's not to lay down and let it walk up all over you either. It's not that.
Something to strive for.
And that's the whole difficulty of it, and then why there's so much elaboration on it and so many words to use. It's like, okay, if it's not this, it's not that, which are the simple things.
Right.
What is it? Oh, well, let me fucking tell you. Right?
Yeah, well, it's hard to articulate complex thoughts too, right? And it's, everybody has a different perception and processes situations differently, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that old, cause and effect.
Yeah, I can't get away from
How
that
you're
one. Eh?
predisposed to certain ideologies or, resolutions, in a way.
Yeah. What you bring into your perception before you even perceive stuff.
Yeah.
That fucking buffalo thing is just like, it captures my mind so well because, like, imagine just like...
Oh, the buffalo or fly thing?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
growing up till like you're 30, 40 years old, seeing nothing but trees, like nothing but trees. So all of your distance judgments are like to that wall
Right, yeah.
forever, right? Because you don't see past anything, just fauna.
There's, nothing past like
Flora,
20 feet
rather,
or
sorry.
anything.
And then you're out into an open field where you've never seen distances like that, and let alone animals like that. The only things you've seen that size were insects up until that point.
True.
And they're moving, but they're not moving right because like in the distance, they move slow, really slow.
Sure.
So I freaked right the fuck out and ran back into the forest.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's part of evolution too.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool how much like our brain fills in the gaps for us that we don't realize it does.
Yeah.
Optical illusions, for example. Oh my god. There's that one spinning thing where if you're watching it spin, you're seeing something inside of it spin the opposite way, and then it would just like cross itself.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it's like a normal object.
But it doesn't,
It's,
yeah.
it's just your point of view.
Right. Yeah, and that can be distorted too, manipulated.
Or those rooms that they make where like they will fuck with the sizes of things, and so they will make the closer corner of the room look like it's the farther corner away.
Yeah.
And then,
That's
have
a
like,
mind fuck.
And then you have like a person walking across that room and is like getting bigger or
Yeah,
some shit like that.
or the mirrors even.
And you still like, even if you know this is an illusion, you just can't unsee what you're seeing, right? Like
Right,
your brain won't do it.
Almost breaks your mind. Yeah, or even those the ones where it's just a bunch of dots.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
if you just stare at it long enough, and unfocus your eyes, right? Then
Yeah,
you
you
can
have to look.
actually
You
see
have
it.
to look past the picture.
Yeah, you
Like if you're
can't be
you
trying
go-
to look for something.
You look at the
just have
wall
to-
and then put the picture in front, and then it appears. Yeah.
Those are pretty crazy.
Yeah. I got good at those. At some point.
Well, even parallel lines, but different length.
Oh yeah, they
Right?
start to look like this, and they're
Yeah.
not. Or the
That bends your
squares,
mind.
or the squares, or seeing the dots that are there,
Yeah.
just because of the crisscrossing pattern.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
And then
Like
there's
literal perception, right?
Yeah, and then there's another one that lets you see how your optic nerve is actually in the way of your eyesight in a specific spot.
Yeah.
If you stare at this spot, there's a dot here, and you're made to stare at a spot here.
Right.
This disappears.
Oh, so you can't even see it then.
But you have to move your head back.
But as
to-
soon as-
Because
to
it's
a
so
certain-
close.
As
So-
soon as you move, it reappears because the other parts of the eye pick it up,
Right.
and then the brain will start filling in the gaps.
Your peripheral, in a way.
Yeah, it'll start filling in the gaps until you stop moving again, and then it just slowly goes away.
Now, there's
it's pretty
actually
neat.
a spot where if you, from the distance from your monitor, there'll be a dot. You move back far enough and it disappears, because it's like that's the point where your optic nerve is going out from the like the back of the cornea or whatever.
Right.
And there's a point where the nerve is going and you can't actually take anything in. So when that dot is right at that point, it's gone. So you go
Yeah, it's
back
the same
further and it appears. You go forward, it's gone. Forward more, and now you can see the dot again.
Yeah. And it's like, because your one eye would lock onto it more probably, right? And then your nose is kind of blocking your peripheral in a way.
Well, you can always see your nose. It's just a very specific spot where there's no light receptors, because the optic nerve is actually sitting on the outside and goes inside.
Yeah.
So it's like, if your eye's like this, the optic nerve is kind of like sitting starts here,
Yeah, towards
and
the
then
back.
and then goes inside. The octopus, its eye shape is actually much more streamlined.
Yeah.
The optic nerve sits here at the back.
Right. Well,
And
their
goes
their
back.
pupils also like sideways or something
Their
too. I
pu-
think, isn't it? It's like
yeah,
a line.
it's aside from that, but they don't have that blind spot like we do. That's
Oh,
that's
okay.
the end. That's the end result, because that little spot where there's no light receptors
Right.
on our eye literally makes us blind to the one spot.
So
It's-
their depth of field is that much broader because there's no
They
optic
don't
nerve
deal
in the
with
way of it.
But like what that means is basically like, who knows how the fuck they're using their eyes?
Right. Yeah.
Because like, I mean, their arms are like sensory receptors for chemistry, so they're like noses and tongues at the same time.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a bit of echolocation as well. With a
I
lot
don't know
of
about echolocation with dolphins. Yeah, obviously.
dolphins,
but
whales for sure.
I haven't heard of.
There's got to be something. I thought they made like some kind of
A
crackle
lot of
kind of noise,
A
right?
lot of marine animals use electricity because water conducts it.
Yeah.
So sharks will use electricity to actually know where something is,
right.
but just they don't have to see it; they sense
yeah,
it.
I've heard that.
Eels will. I think it's eels.
Electric eel.
Some of them will use the discharge of the shock itself to paralyze the nerve system of the other animal, so it's
Yeah.
stuck rigidly.
I saw a video
box it up.
like a few days back of an eel. There's a crocodile sitting at a shore. An eel starts coming up and just hanging out, and then the crocodile bites the eel, and then you don't really know what's happening. Nothing's happening, but like slowly the crocodile's spine is just like curling up and going back and like hunching over.
Yeah.
And then it's just sitting there, and then it's like it's
Locked
dead.
right up.
It's gone. Whatever happened, like they both died. Yeah. Interesting nature, biology.
Yeah. Yeah, and then a lot of them deal with poisons.
Venoms, poisons. Venom is more common than poison. Poison is don't eat me. Venom is I will.
It's more of an
I'm
offensive
hunting.
kind of thing.
I'm hunting you.
Right, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, like poison's more as a defense.
Yeah, like don't eat me is in like you eat me, you get sick and you die.
Right,
Bad
yeah.
idea. Venom is I bite you so I can wait for you to die and eat you.
Basically, yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And the humans never evolved on those
Well, what
measures.
for? What for? We take a
We
dart.
don't need it,
We take a dart. We rub it in the froggy. We go.
right?
You got our poison
Yeah.
or venom, rather.
Mm-hmm.
Poison becomes
Well,
venom.
because I guess we've always
That's
been
the one.
the dominant kind of in the food chain hierarchy.
Well, the only really different thing that you can say about humans as opposed to any other animal is that really we are the generalization of every animal there is. We do everything they do
Right.
because we can upload
in culture.
Yes, we can upload
Yeah.
what they do as our mental process
our mind map.
and then reflect it back again, right? So
Mhm.
with humans, you see basically in every single culture there is, unless it's been normalized towards civilization, what you basically see is different expressions of the animal kingdom working themselves out in different ways. So you'll have promiscuous cultures,
Right.
you'll have so of course I'm forgetting the opposite word. Conservative.
Loyal.
Conservative. very conservative, like taboo, everything is taboo kind of cultures. Like
Right,
you get an expression of everything. You have like
Oh,
say,
okay. I hear you, yeah.
say with the chimps, you get a very, very strict warrior culture with the animal
Oh, yeah.
itself. With bonobos, which are like the opposite end of the spectrum, you get a very, what do you call, promiscuous culture in which most conflicts are resolved for fucking. Right? Humans. Oh, and then
It's a
there's
combination,
So hold on,
kind of,
hold on.
yeah.
Then there's gorillas who are like they hold harems, right?
Right. So the biggest, baddest one gets
Right.
all the chicks.
In humans, yeah, in humans you see a little bit of A, a little bit of B,
Right.
a little bit of C, and a little bit of everything else too. Like every which way it can go in nature with the animals, we are actually we generalize it on top of it, and just make it a game of it, right?
Right. Well, because I guess technically we've all evolved from the same single cell organisms into what we are today. Right?
Right, which ironically comes from being asexual, so just cloning,
Right.
to hermaphrodites, which is every creature is both
reptiles,
sexes.
a lot of cases.
No, snails and stuff. Both sides are both male and female, so
Right.
it doesn't matter who's who, if you will.
Right.
Two,
They can
fully,
breed by themselves. So
Yeah,
They don't need.
to fully
a partner.
differentiated sexual reproduction that you see in a higher plane. But again, and this is what I love this. I love this argument because if people try to talk about nature and how gay is against nature and all of that, if you actually trace it back, you come from banging the same thing as you,
Right. Yeah.
homogeneously, to hetero.
Right.
It comes out of that. So,
well, and it's not
what's
like.
more natural though? it's not a question of nature.
But things like to fuck, and it's like, you can't say gay is like a new thing. It's like fucking. It's
All
been
you need
around
to say
forever
is this.
too.
All
Right.
all you need to say is this. This is less complex than the hetero
Right.
orientation, and when you have something that's far more complex than the simple stuff, things can go awry along the way.
Sure.
And so, it's not too surprising that some kind of regression might happen, which is not at all unnatural.
Right.
Right, so it could get mixed up. Like there's lots of factors. Shit can mix up.
Yeah.
So we have asexual people, we have gay, we have bi, we have everything in between.
Right.
We have your conservative, hetero, everything. Every scenario plays out for
Yeah.
us. So I don't like the nature argument against gays. To sum it up.
Well, I mean, I understand it because it goes against production, right? You can't make a baby.
Yeah, but
Right,
but
making-
that's assuming like there's like a planned like goal to do that. Meanwhile, it's just the way things work, and
Right.
along the way of its development, it go this way, that way, the other way, and the third way. There's no actual goal. It's just with this amount of stuff available, it just can keep going. So it does. You don't need a goal for that.
Yeah.
If you have enough people fucking, you really don't have a problem.
Doesn't matter if there's a few that aren't.
Yeah, it's really not an issue. And even they have kids too. It's not like
Well, nowadays too, there's like
Well, and
artificial
before-
insemination, whatever.
no.
right?
Before people will have convenience marriages,
Okay, sure.
all of that shit. People will have marriages out of the necessity to appease their families.
Yeah.
People who will just bite the bullet just to have the kid.
Well, and before it was more of a societal norm and more expected, whereas now marriage is kind of a joke as an institution. Right?
It's always been a joke. Marriage has always been a means to transfer property from one generation to the next.
Or stopping wars and shit like that, right? Between
Which is another way of
aristocrats.
Which
and,
is
like,
another
those
way of taking
societies.
property and making sure it transfers to the next generation.
Right.
Like, property is like everything there.
But you know what I'm saying? Like the princess from this kingdom will
Yeah.
marry the prince of this kingdom.
Right, but the
Right?
end goal.
And that would be.
But the end goal is
their-
to keep the kingdom.
That's it.
Property.
As,
that's the
fair trade. Keep
Like,
I'm
I'm not
stop
I'm not
wars.
saying you're wrong. I'm trying to like my whole I guess shtick is to like to just drain the humanity out of that picture and
Sure.
just show how fucking vacant it is from what we actually feel as human beings towards what it actually is.
Right.
So like when you discuss these marriages, like it's all to keep these kingdoms around.
Yeah.
What happens to these people?
Right. And but if you're truly bonded to the person, you don't need this artificial label on it.
Well, I already
Right.
I'm lucky enough to experience something to that effect, very much so.
Right. But now it's more about legal things, right? Like you said, about property.
It felt so weird to have to sign a contract to say I can fuck my wife.
What?
Legally.
What?
When I got married, when you get married,
Yeah.
you're signing a contract. That's part of the whole ceremony.
Right.
What does that contract actually say? If not, these two people are able to go to bed together without anybody having any further judgments on the subject matter.
Well, that's under the eyes of the church. Legally, no.
Yeah, I know that much. I've got married under the eyes of the church, so.
But that's why you're saying that was in there.
But that tradition,
overall,
that tradition does not carry from a secular perspective. It carries on from that, and so
that's where it originates. Yes.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
so we might have lost something in the legalese in the last century. Cool. Yes. My parents, for example, just have their small ceremony in what do you call it?
City Hall or something.
Yeah. But I don't think a lot of people view marriage that way. A lot of people think of it as this flesh by flesh union,
Right.
in the mythological sense, even if they're not that Christian. So that's why cheating is a hot topic, right? Because if it wasn't, because if it was just the legalities, nobody would give a shit about the cheating aspect. But no, we're resigned to each other, so therefore there's some expectation to get involved.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the contract you signed. Is like saying I can fuck this person, and nobody can say shit about it. Otherwise, there will be questions, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you fuck somebody else after you signing that contract.
Well, that's what I think the purpose of it is like, you're bound by these responsibilities, take care of your wife, don't fuck everybody, this and that, sickness and in health, kind of,
We need a contract for that?
You
What
don't.
the fuck is wrong with us?
You don't,
No,
but
I'm saying, like,
legality-wise, so say,
No, I
you want to break up.
Context. I'm a person of like I want lifelong friends. I don't deal with people like interactions of like tit for tat.
Right.
Never have. So for
Yeah,
me,
you can't
so
be
for
like
me, it's
that.
like I didn't marry my wife when I signed the contract. We married way beforehand, like when we became together, right?
Yeah.
So like that was us.
Right.
But we still have to deal with this fucking world, so we have to sign the contract. So.
Well, and
Again.
then when there's kids involved, it's
Oh no,
a
we
little
had kids
different.
after, so we're cool.
Yeah,
Cool that
that's
way.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea, so it was very awkward for me to have to actually sign a piece of paper to say to everybody else, including her parents, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, it's okay now.
I devote myself to you and
Yeah. Meanwhile, it was already the truth, so what the fuck for?
right. It's just for optics.
I mean, part of it was. I'm not gonna say that. It wasn't.
Transactions. Oh man.
Oh man. On that note, fuck, 4:30.
Yeah.
Wasted enough time.
Workday is over.
No, I don't know. It's good to talk about these complex
Yep.
conversations.
Yep. It's a good context. The world, religion,
Yeah.
civilization, where it all went wrong, where it's going.
It's all kind of connected, right?
Yep.
Well, we'll
Yep,
come
yep.
to the solution eventually.
The solution.
If there ever is one, which
We'll be sure to sell it
yeah.
for a profit.
Yeah. Oh man. All right.
Yep. You getting some work done there a little bit, or
No, fuck no.
just piecing out?
To grab my bit of energy. Thought you guys were up here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on, Dustman. Well, thanks for coming by, man. Anytime you see we're up here,
All right.
it's always good to shoot the shit, get a different perspective, and.
Like I said, hopefully I didn't get you guys too off topic, but
No, it was all within the realm.
very nice.
Yeah.
And do something with this board.
Yeah, that's the World Summit board.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Sorry for talking your ear off.
Oh no, it's all good. I was talking a bit too, getting you guys off topic.
It's okay to tell me to shut up once in a while, or just between us. Like, I know I can get going, and then I can fucking go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we know.
Well, everybody, they have a certain tangent in their mind, and it's hard to get off of it.
Yeah, this shit's been bothering me for a while. Can you tell?
Well, and if you don't, so you could be having these thoughts in your mind, and if you don't actually express them, it doesn't become anything, right? So you need to at least get it out, write it down, maybe.
Well, if I get hit by a bus, at least it's been recorded, right?
But that's how you work it out. It's not like you can work everything out in your mind.
As if it's that important, Jen. Yeah.
That's
But yeah, to talk with other people, you get the other perspectives and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of bounce feedback, whatnot.
Right, and it
Yeah.
almost by saying it, it takes a bit of a weight
It's-
off your mind in a way too.
I'm also like really, really far gone here, and it's really nice to know I didn't like fall off a cliff somewhere in the process.
Hey man.
You know what I mean?
Still
Yeah,
early.
yeah. It's not too late.
Still early.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Good seeing you.
Yeah, buddy.
Have a good rest of your weekend.
You too.
You too.
So that's a wrap.
Yep. I said probably a grand total of 20 or 30 words.
That did not work out the way we expected it at all.
No, but it does work out. In the end, it works out. But so we got 20 minutes till 5. We're pretty much at wrap-up time here.
Yep.
So we did manage to discuss the shit out of what attempts to pass for medicine, i.e. religion and all these expectations and shit. Right?
Which amount to nothing but platitudes.
So we are promising that our medicine is different fundamentally in that it's not just a Band-Aid put onto a ball of Band-Aids, but it actually dissolves the entire ball back to something of ways that, let's say...
Before it was Band-Aided.
Before the whole ball started rolling as it is in its current shape.
Mm-hmm.
So that's medicine. Yeah, we didn't really get into like details or anything like that, or the sentience machine on top of that. Didn't really get into specifics. I don't know that we have to at this point.
No, I'll take the hit.
It is too late.
Yeah, I'll take the hit. As far as that goes.
Too late.
I had different plans for today, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's always okay to get derailed somewhat by another person. So.
Yeah, well, that's always welcome. Even like anybody in the chat, like Eon today, which is appreciate.
I don't mean derailed, sorry.
Other perspective input. That's the best, really.
It was a kind of like an off course, but only it did serve.
Well,
It did serve the purpose of trying to find articulations that are a bit more down to earth about the specifics of what we're trying to get across.
and what we're trying to get across is so generic that we could have kept trying to lead into the machine stack. Like, okay, this is it. We're at this part. This is the machine, but it's or the medicine, but it's from the charlatan. So it's purported medicine, but it isn't actually, because it's just transactional ultimately, and feeds fuel to the same fire. I thought of a term. What about soul inflammation?
Huh.
Like, you know, when you get punched or something, all the blood goes there, and you get a bruise, and it's inflamed. Right, it's soul inflammation. So that's what the ego is causing. And it kind of implies a response from the body, that there's some kind of response needs to happen, or to deal with
It's
that.
like an autoimmune disease.
And also, it's kind of like when your lungs fill up with cytokine storm or whatever, as people have become aware of certain processes that can happen, where the immune system gets completely out of control, and you end up flooding your lungs with something that's supposed to be dealing with, a threat. Right? The Band-Aid becomes just
A blocker.
it fills the entire environment.
Yeah. Okay. I don't actually know the reference, but
The cytokine storm.
yeah.
That's, well, I figured because people are researching COVID and all that. That was one of the reasons why people were saying a lot of deaths may have been occurring due to pneumonia, basically.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right, the flooding of the lungs by
The immune
the
system.
response. Yep. And it's actually an out of control response, which shouldn't be happening in the body. It shouldn't be producing that much. But there's like certain things
Ebola does the same thing.
that can stop it from realizing what it's doing to itself. A breakaway condition in the immune system, flooding the environment with pieces of Band-Aid. Yep. And so it is.
You can actually call the breakaway civilization as an autoimmune disease because it's literally using the same things to what do you call it? It twists hygiene into the wrong sense of what should be kept and what should be discarded.
Yeah.
So it's like the same repository of actions, just twisted into a wrong cycle.
Well, the need for medicine becomes instantly apparent with the breakaway of the ego machine, but the medicine itself is based on the ego machine. It's not a self-understanding and emergence of higher order above that utilizing the ego. It's actually just stacking more ego on top of ego.
Mm-hmm.
As in the ball of Band-Aid ball. So yeah, we might as well pack up then. I guess
Yep.
that's pretty much it. So we did kind of at least go over the 4 machines and kind of introduce some, like, although we didn't latch in the references very
What are the
well
4
or
machines
very
again?
much.
You had self.
Self, coming from self-reference, making the self object. We had the ego machine, aka what we've called for hijacking or just market machine. And self, of course, could relate, we could say polymorphic machine. So that's 2. And then the medicine machine and the sentience machine.
Okay, so we touched on medicine to say that medicine is taking that outflow of ego and turning it back upon itself for out of essentially which it came, and
Yeah.
then sentience machine is
The
the
negative feedback loop.
outcome of that, as the resultant outcome of that. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, or at least once the medicine is applied, there is a space is open for the sentience machine to then operate. Just kind of theorizing. We didn't really make those linkages, connections clear yet. But yeah, it's almost like a slot that we know there's something a little bit murky, tough to pin down, to describe. But my thinking in there also is that this medicine machine as a machine is kind of as well in some ways not a dead system, but just like almost a collection of things, processes, routines, which help the ego to dissolve back into the self, and the medicine itself being kind of prescriptive and like scripted in a way, right?
So transactional in some sense,
Right.
but the transactions are geared towards the negative feedback loop that allows
Yeah.
the ego to sort of detach.
Exactly. So then that's why I'm figuring, well, there's another machine on top of that, which is like, well, what's the thing that's subtly doing all of this? kind of at every layer. It's there, but it's not until
that's
it really
medicine.
comes into its full.
That would be medicine, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean like sentience. Like you come to a thing that's kind of emergent that you don't really see until all three of the
Oh, you mean like
previous come into their full.
Hyperstitional, maybe? Before emergence?
Well, I mean that
Sentience,
that the medicine machine can be, I think, can be utilized in sort of a participatory way. Right? Obviously, to come into membership would be to have the sentience machine come more into view. Right? But the medicine can be a participant done. I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same
right?
thing here.
But yeah, and I just kind of had that holonic feeling, like where you're having the fourth one out being the sentience machine that has had a hand in play in all of the previous, but it's kind of like something that doesn't become obvious until the other sets are there.
So this is why I like it to be hyperstitional. It's like the ideal that is aimed for, and it materializes because of it being the ideal. So, the conceptualization of the sentient machine is, by extension, is its cause for creation, its emergence out of the process itself. Right? It's an emergent phenomenon, but as a causal one, it starts to press down. So, hyperstitionally wise, it's like the medicine machine is just sort of has a parallel in the sentience machine that it starts to become active or active.
And also, we see kind of an interesting connection between the sentience machine and the self machine, in that as being kind of like seeing as as the outsiders of the process, that you're kind of coming back to something that you left. From the self you left and you went to the ego. The ego had to be repaired through medicine. These are kind of like an internal dynamic going on, and then you're back, boom, you're out. You're back out into the self with the sentience in a holistic understanding of how the ego takes you out and the medicine puts you back in, and now you're back to kind of the whole. So that's kind of taking the holonic model flavor to the stack of machines.
Yep.
I don't know how well that works exactly, but it seems to. And at any rate, that is it for today, ladies and gentlemen and others. Hopefully you all enjoyed our conversation today. And we didn't quite, it wasn't quite as much a development meeting as a kind of casual conversation with other people, which is perfectly awesome. So that's actually a bonus, unexpected bonus, which we're happy for. And we appreciate you all, and we will see you next time. And with that, sayonara.